I want to thank you for coming. My name is Susan Trier, and I'm a board member with the Rock Lake Improvement Association. And we have just an incredible morning planned for you with a tremendous amount of information. I want you to feel comfortable enough to ask questions. And if there's any concerns that you have that you'd like some kind of follow-up, if you would just talk to anybody with like a dragonfly name tag, we would love to follow up with you on it, okay? So, Rock Lake Improvement Association has been around since like 1971-ish, on and off. Our mission is to promote and generate positive action on issues concerning the preservation, protection, and the improvement of Rock Lake. We are a non-profit organization, completely volunteer. We have about 175 households as members at this point. So our funding comes from our members and from donors. We do a little bit of fundraising. Just last week, we participated in a Culver's Night where we got 10% of the proceeds. We have some beautiful art that's for sale that was done by a Lake Mills resident, Gail Jessic, for us, completely complimentary, and we still have some t-shirts as well. So that's pretty much the max of our fundraising. We also have gotten grants from the state. Our most recent grant we used to create a very comprehensive lake management plan. As far as major accomplishments, or like the elevator speech, I think one of the most great things that we ever accomplished was our involvement with Korth Park, and that was well before my time. But I understand that we were very involved in finding signatures, helping financially, investing sweat equity to get the park to look like it does now. And that is a huge impact for us as far as the quality of our water to have that lovely park. In addition to that, we got some funding to do a study on the Milajala Channel to try to study the amount of nutrients that are coming in through that inlet. There's still work that needs to be done on that particular part. The other part of our work that we do is a lot of advocating. We work with the city, we work with the county and town to voice any issues and concerns with the lake. Most recently, you might have known that we worked to help understand the processes of beach closures and water quality associated with that. We've worked with this, made recommendations to the city of where to put the snow for, salt issues not going into the mill pond. We've also done issues trying to keep invasive species out of the lake. The other big group of our work is an outreach to the community. We're involved in the city festivals. Just last week, earlier this month, we had our annual spring cleanup. We had 50 volunteers show up to help us pick up garbage and also pull garlic mustard, although it was pretty tiny. It's big now. So maybe we should have another one. We also, some of you might have gone to our garden walk last year. And we've been involved with the city in alerting residents the issues associated with letting your leaves, and they call it the leaf tea, go into the lake and add nutrients that way. So earlier I had mentioned that we did a lake management plan. An executive summary is over there by the booth if you'd like. It's also on our website. But one of the goals of the lake management plan was water quality, obviously. And we want to go ahead and improve the water quality by reducing the summer average phosphorus level by 20%. And we came up with this number based on an 8-year average, and we think it's really quite feasible. But how do we get there? It's a multi-pronged approach. There's no easy answer. We need to work with area farmers and deal with soil quality. We want to work with the city and deal with streets. And the other big issue is us, all right? Those of us that own property around the lake, because our lakeshore directly drains into the lake. So in the process of doing the management plan, this is what the lake currently looks like. About 28% of the properties surrounding the lake are covered with native vegetation and meet standards. And what we'd like to do in the next 5 years is maybe have that look like 40%. And what would that look like hypothetically if 50% of the lake was covered? The other goal that we have, we've got lots of goals on the management plan, but one goal that we have is to preserve the habitat for the lake's residents. And that's our shoreline. Our shorelines create the habitat for these guys. And I just went ahead and pulled up some. So right there over by the turtle, that's a soft-shell spiny turtle. And you can see them nesting on the shoulder of County B, which just causes me great ansiedade. When I first saw it, I was terrified. I wanted to go try to save them all, and you know, that's their thing. We've got other turtles as well, a blanding turtle, which is a threatened turtle for us, a painted snapper and musk. And then right next to it, I could use a little, you changed my picture. Anyways, this is a needle nose or long nose gar, and I got to tell you, I was so excited when I saw this fish for the very first time. They kind of had a splottled back from my pontoon. This is like a living fossil. They have evidence of this fish 100 million years ago. Believe it or not, this fish actually has rudimentary lungs, and it can come to the top of the surface of the water and gulp air. So it's just crazy. They're extremely long-lived, average 15 to 20 years, though they had one gar that they said went 39 that was captured, all right? A female gar can't even lay eggs until she's 6 years old. And for us in our lake, we should be so happy to have these fish because they eat baby carp. So give them credit. Let's keep the gar in there for the baby carp. The other thing is not just, so when you changed out the picture, you changed out the animation, no problem. So we have, besides gar, we have 37 other species, okay? And you all know how well regarded our lake is as far as the fishing community. They're out there nonstop. We have about 5 species that are considered rare, so they're either special concern or they're threatened or they're endangered. One species I wanted to bring up to you is the slender mad tom, crazy name. They are a highly endangered fish, and it's kind of crazy because they like to be in moving water, clear streams, and we found one in the lake, and we're like, we found them again. So what's happening is they've actually making a home of Rock Lake, and as of last year, and Patricia, you could correct me if I'm wrong, we were like the only lake in the state of Wisconsin that has these fish. So it's a pretty special situation. The other thing I wanted to bring up is bass. Everybody knows bass is a lovely sport fish. And I was just talking to a guy over on the railroad track who was looking for bass. So there are 2 versions of bass, or 2 species of bass that we have, rock and smallmouth. And the reason these are kind of interesting is because they are very intolerant fish to changes in water quality. So if there's turbidity in the water, or you could kind of think of that as turbulence, like smoke in the air, or if there's siltation, the idea that there's particles floating in the water, their numbers dive off. And maybe Patrick will talk a little bit about how the lake quality changes the population of fish. So in a way, we could look at the smallmouth bass and the rock bass as sort of like canaries in the coal mine for us. Okay. Oh, I guess I didn't push hard enough. And then on the far corner over there is a bullfrog. I've got 4 of them on my shoreline. I adore them. They just started singing like 2 days ago. And besides bullfrogs, we've got leopard frogs, Peeper's chorus. They've been singing for a while. The toads have just started, green, and the Cope's tree frog. Sue, if she raises her hand in the back. Anyway, she's been counting frogs and listening to them for a long time. Bird-wise, we've got a tremendous number of woodland birds, meadow birds because of course, tremendous number of migratory fowl. You guys got to take a look at it. I thought I would highlight just some of the year-long residents. And we definitely have bald eagles on the lake. Has anybody seen any of them before? Yeah. So we've got, almost every day. They're in the cottonwood next to my house. So we have adult. It's got to be a mated pair. We have immature bald eagles. Besides that, we have osprey. We definitely have a mated pair of osprey. We've got wood ducks and kingfishers. I'm bringing up the idea of the black tern, or sometimes it's called the dark tern. They're a little bit more unusual. We have a colony of them on the marsh side, so kind of interesting. So I'm right on time. Here's the agenda for what we're going to do today. We have Patrick Goggin to be our keynote speaker. We're very fortunate to have him. I can't believe he agreed to come down and be with us. He's in high demand. He's going to talk to us about shorelines and some basic information on that, and then Bill and Evonne volunteered to come and talk to us about their shoreline on Beaver Dam Lake and some of what's going on over there. Then Patrick is going to come back up and talk about erosion, and then Lisa is going to talk to us about designing shorelines and what it's like to work with some professional in order to get that done, and then Patricia is going to come ahead and talk about follow-up considerations. Questions? Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. As Susan said, my name is Pat Goggin. I work with UW Extension Lakes out of the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Any pointers out there? Yeah, give me some. All right. And I work with something called the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership. Anyone hear of that entity or get our Lake Tides newsletter, maybe? Well, if you want to get engaged with our Wisconsin Lakes Partnership, Lake Tides is a great way to do it. It's a quarterly newsletter that goes out to some 35 states and over 30,000 people. And basically what we try to do for the last 40 years with it is keep you in tune with the world of lakes, from research to success stories to what's going on. So here's a sign-up sheet, and I brought a couple copies if you want to engage. And then also, if I could get a couple helpers, these are, I have a handout here with basically some of the themes I'm talking about here today. And I know it says EcoTrek on the top, but ignore that. This was a handout. I was at a Shoreland station for 150 seventh graders on Thursday. And at first, I thought they were going to be high schoolers, so I was going to give them a handout. And then I pictured all this paper flying around in the woods and in the lake, and I retracted. So I'm recycling my handout. And many of the things I talked about with the students are themes we're going to talk about here today. So please take a look at that as we go through. Again, I'm going to go through attributes and characteristics of healthy lake shores and talk through what that healthy lake attributes look like and how they function. We'll spend a little time then talking about some changes on our lakes and what those changes have meant in terms of the health of lakes, and the challenges that have come with the development pressure on our lakes. That's not to say that development is bad. The idea is it's a balancing act, right? We want to love lakes and live on lakes, but at the same time, the way we develop and use our parcels in harmony with the lake such that we keep the water clean so we can use it, fish on it, boat on it, and swim in it. And so we'll go through some of what that history looks like. And then we'll talk more about the services that the lakeshore gives to the lake system. We'll spend some time in the second half on the erosion side of things, just talking about what it looks like, how you ID it, what causes it, and a little bit on getting to recognizing it and solutions with healthy lakes. I'm going to introduce you to healthy lakes, and Patricia's going to talk more about it as well. I have lots of handouts too. I work for UW Extension. We love our handouts, so please take advantage. You can't absorb everything in a second, and I'm the kind of person, maybe you are too, I need to grab information and spend some time with it and absorb it. So please help yourself to those handouts. And again, this Wisconsin Lakes Partnership has been around for 40 years, and basically it's a confluence of UW Extension. We have an arm in education as well as academia. Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, our technical service helpers, as well as grants that we'll talk about here today. And then Wisconsin Lakes, our statewide advocacy group for lakes, as well as it represents folks like you, over 900 lake associations and districts and entities across the state of Wisconsin. And they're citizens like you who give a damn about lakes and come together to try to make the lake a healthier environment and keep it for the future looking strong and well. And so engage with us if you haven't learned about the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership, please do. Well, here is, from my eye, some of the things we start to think about and see on a healthy shoreline. And so I just want to walk you through some of the attributes and the values and functions that go with these different attributes of the lakeshore area. So let's start out in the water here. A lot of times we have forested systems, and maybe here you're a little bit in prairie country, which is kind of cool. I don't get to Rock County a lot, or Jefferson County, sorry. But you're in prairie country. You're in where historically we not only maybe had trees up to the edge, but it might have been prairie up to the edge. So keep that in mind. That may change your planting plans or ideas about what can work from a native plant point of view later. But if it was a forest environment, a lot of wood gets recruited and just basically falls into the lake over hundreds of years. That wood falls into the lake and it becomes great habitat. So it might be tree stumps. These tree stumps do a couple things. They provide wildlife habitat, but they also provide wave retention and erosion control, because if it's ice or waves, as soon as that energy comes up and hits that shoreline, that wood is helping slow it down or break up the ice and dissipate that energy. Often on a healthy shoreline, we would see aquatic emergent vegetation. So it intercepts the lake's sediment runoff, and so we'll talk about the development history and how we've had increased runoff. And these emergent plants are just key. They're little fish factories. Our baby spawning fish are going to be in there, as well as the baby fish are going to be in there utilizing the small insect life or other life that's in there. And basically, it's just important habitat from a nesting and spawning point of view, as well as erosion control. Those plants are holding soil and also providing wave retention services. We might get logs like this up against the shore. Again, that's providing habitat as well as some erosion control and just basically shoring up the bank. And then let's talk about that shoreland, where the land and water meet. So you might hear me flip back and forth between the word shoreland and lake shores. Lake shore is just basically a shoreland on a lake, lake shore, whereas shoreland sometimes is more of a term used for streams, rivers, lakes, the edge of any water body, even a pond, for example. But shoreland vegetation, we'd love to see 3 tiers of vegetation. So we have a canopy layer of a mature tree or a maturing set of trees. We have a mid layer of smaller trees or shrubs, very key to migratory birds and a whole suite of wildlife. And then that ground layer. You might have heard the word duff before, D-U-F-F. That's the organic matter that builds up in the soil over time. It's the pine needles, it's the twigs from trees, it's the deciduous leaves that fall. It's the decaying matter in the forest, and that duff is like a sponge. You literally hit water, hits it, and it just soaks it right up. Conversely, grass isn't so good at that. Yes, we can get some infiltration with grass, but it only has a 6-inch root structure, and it's not doing the heavy lifting that these 3 tiers of vegetation in that duff layer are performing. So, often we use the term 80 to 90% of all life we'd find here in Wisconsin is utilizing this lakeshore area at some point during their life cycle. It might just be to come get a drink or to use it from a connectivity point to get from A to B. For example, up where I live, we just had a moose in Rhinelander, which is pretty cool. They don't come that south usually, but the reason it shows up is it's using that riparian corridor. Riparian just means next to water, and it's coming down using that connected waterway to come down and see Rhinelander. So it's pretty cool. And so having this vegetation, those 3 tiers, canopy, mid-layer, and ground layer is very key. And 80% of life is utilizing this area at some point, whether it's for nesting, food, water, and connectivity. And we have different zones out there. And so basically different plants grow in these different water depths and different types of zonation to our lakeshore edge. So starting out in zone 1, where we have about 1.5 feet to 6 feet of water, that we call the submergent zone. So that's where those bulrush or some of these other plants would be. But these, more submergent plants, you see these plants are rooted on the bottom and then they canopy out to the top. But basically it might be 6 feet of water. Plants, depending on water clarity, can grow to even in 20, 30 feet of water. And those might be the floating type varieties of aquatic plants. Then we get to zone 2, and here you see how the water depth shortened a little. It might be anywhere from just saturated soil to a depth of 18 inches there. And a different suite of plants. These are emergent plants that pop up out of the water like that bulrush does, or the pickerel weed, if you've seen that beautiful purple flower out there on the lake, and so on. Then we move into the land-water interface, the wet meadow zone. This is where we're doing that shoreline restoration work. The key here is, though, is understanding the soil. Sometimes it's a wet-footed situation. Other times it transitions right to a sandy, dry situation. And so understanding where we're at there is critical in this wet meadow zone. Sometimes it's just wet part of the year. Other times it's wet throughout the year. So it says permanent here, but on lake shores we might have some variability there. And then the floodplain. We don't have floodplains so much on lakes, but we do get water fluctuations. I'm not sure how much rock has. Do you guys have any swing in elevations? You're not a flowage, are you? So you don't have big swings. However, there's some lakes out there that have pretty significant ups and downs when it comes to water. The other piece of ups and downs with water comes with Mother Nature and the way rain's delivered. Up in the Northwoods in the early 2000s, we had a drought, and then it switched. And down here, you were getting rain coming out of your ears. And then it flipped, and we got wet towards the end of the 2010-ish kind of deal. But we can see fluctuations in water that way, too. And then the last zone is the upland zone. And frankly, this is the area, in working with folks like you, lakeshore property owners, and folks who live on lakes, that we could probably have done a better job of over the last 40 years, because the actions up on this upland really drive the health of the water and the health of that habitat. We'll talk more about that here today. Part of the story here is this development history of lakes. How many came to the lake, Rock Lake or another lake, in the first time, and it was something like this, a little 3-season cabin. Anyone remember these? Yeah, they were used to be out there. And you slept outside, right? Yeah, Mom and Dad got the inside and the kids were thrown in a tent outside kind of deal. Well, this might be 800 square feet. You see a little roof here, probably a gravel driveway, a little, and so let's look at how this 1940s to maybe 1960s type of development impacted the lake. So we're on a forested slope, 6% grassy corridor down to the lake, so we haven't put any hard structures there. Here's our little cottage that's roughly 25 by 28 feet. And here's the impact on the lake. We get some runoff because of the disturbed soil, 1,000 square feet of runoff, a bump of phosphorus to the lake, and 20 pounds of sediment coming off to the lake. Fast forward the last, I'd say since the 1960s to today, many of these cabins have been converted to 4-season structures. Basically, could be anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5,000 square feet. And the key is this change right here, these hard structures. And that's not to say you couldn't put a structure like this on a lake and be in balance with the lake. The idea is to do it in such a way that we're not having dirty water get to the lake and so on. Because part of the challenge with these bigger structures is it really does change the amount. The runoff jumped up by 5 times, so we have 5 times as much runoff. Look at the phosphorus. Jumped 6 times the amount of phosphorus is now coming with that dirty sediment and water to the lake. And then the sediment itself is 18 times as much sediment. If you're a fisher person, that should matter to you, because that sediment gets into those rocky areas where the fish spawn, and it covers it up and it destroys the habitat. Another thing sediment does is that turbidity that Susan talked about. If I'm a common loon or a predatory fish that has to use sight to find my prey, if the water's turbid and I can't see what I'm trying to hunt for, I'm going to suffer, and I might not be able to use that lake anymore because I can't do the job of hunting because I can't see things. So turbidity can certainly impact wildlife. And here's what the numbers look like. So there's the bump in runoff. There's that huge bump in phosphorus. And why is phosphorus important? Well, that's basically the food that drives the aquatic plant community engine in your lake. And so if we get more food coming to the lake, those aquatic plants, maybe even more importantly, blue-green algae might start to be a problem. And how many have heard of cyanobacteria that go with those blue-green algae? Problematic stuff. Gets us sick, gets our pets sick, and can be really a bad news kind of scenario. So the idea is to develop our properties in such a way that we're keeping that dirty water from getting to the lake, that we're keeping as much habitat, those 3 tiers of vegetation near the shoreline. And we'll talk more about that. And this has been, this story of change on our lakes has been reinforced through something called the National Lakes Assessment through the Environmental Protection Agency. Starting first in 2007, then they did it 5 years later in 2012, and again just in 2017, a subset of lakes are looked at all across the nation. And what they do in the study is try to identify what's stressing lakes, what's hurting lakes, what's causing problems on lakes. And the number one stressor in all three of those surveys over the 5-year intervals has been the loss of lakeshore habitat. Those 3 tiers of vegetation have been compromised or changed, and basically that has led to challenges on the lake. You know, we've been studying this in the state of Wisconsin for quite a long time. So we know undeveloped lakes typically have different communities of birds than developed lakes. We get more of the backyard urban birds and less of the forest interior birds. Why? Because we took that shrub layer out. We took that ground layer out that those birds are relying on. So if we can put some of that habitat back, we're going to see those birds. You see this picture here. The red is red is developed and the green is developed. Undeveloped lakes, a lot of times we leave the canopy because we can still see the lake and the view corridor pretty well if we leave the canopy. But look at the understory, might be anywhere from 10 to 30%. I was really happy to see, what was your average? 40%, I think, for the shrub layer on your survey. That's pretty good. It's not ideal, of course, but we can do better. But I've seen worse lakes. So kudos to you for keeping some of that shrub layer around. But a lot of times that shrub layer gets hammered. Same with the ground layer, that duff I spoke about, the grasses, the sedges, wildflowers, things like ferns. That whole community of plants is doing the heavy lifting of a couple things, helping water infiltrate, but also holding that soil with deep roots, and we'll talk more about that. The other thing we've done on lakes, and I'm not sure where you're at with Rock Lake, I know you've put some fish sticks in, but one of the lessons we've learned is wood is good. Wood is basically the furniture in the living room of our lake. And a lot of times what we did is we pulled that wood out. We thought we were doing a good thing, cleaning things up as we humans sometimes like to do. And basically we pulled wood out of lakes. But on a healthy lake where we have that tree falling in every once in a while, either a dead tree or a wind event, we can get as many as 500, 600 trees per linear mile of wood piled up along that shoreline. And that's all wonderful habitat for insect life, small zooplankton and phytoplankton, and those small fishes that are looking for little niches and refuges to hide from other fish. So wood has also been a big driver in the changes of our lakes, the loss of that lake, or the loss of that habitat. And with these changes, we have seen some of the challenges that come with lake management. So one is the loss of that water clarity, or the change to that more turbid. If the sediment gets into the water and all of a sudden we can't see that Secchi disc down 20 feet, it's more like 10 feet, or maybe it's 3 feet if you really have a lake that's challenged. And so water clarity has certainly been a challenge. And then we can get that pulse of phosphorus from the development on lakes. If that phosphorus isn't being managed and that water isn't being diverted and infiltrated, instead it gets to the lake and it feeds the lake in these harmful algal blooms, which can certainly be a hazard for us and things like our pets. We talked a little about fisheries degradation, whether it's the sediment covering up walleye habitat or nearshore habitat for bluegills and crappies, things like that. In general, though, if we pull that wood out, fish are also going to be suffering because they don't have as much habitat. They get a little more desperate for food, and instead of eating what might be their normal prey, they might even start eating their young of the year of their own species because they're so hungry. And it can really change the dynamic of the whole fishery if you don't have good habitat in your lake. Sounds like you're doing pretty well, though. You sounded like you have a pretty neat fishery going on. So, one of the tools in the toolbox for us to think about is shoreline restoration as a tool to deal with some of these challenges and to deal basically with two things we're trying to do on our properties. Deal with keeping more of that wildlife, those 3 tiers of vegetation in the nearshore area, and then controlling that water. Instead of that dirty water coming off the rooftops or the driveway and going to the lake and delivering that phosphorus and sediment, can we manage that water? Can we send it to a rain garden? Can we send it to an infiltration area in the forest to infiltrate back in, soak into the ground. The sediments get pulled out, and we don't have the challenges that come with that water getting to the lake. So why think about shoreline restoration? Well, we can leave a legacy. I think Elder Leopold said one of the best things we can do, I'm paraphrasing here, is leave a piece of property in better condition than when we found it. And so if we can do that with our lake property, I think that's a legacy worth leaving. Also, there's less maintenance. I didn't say no maintenance, and Lisa will probably touch on this. The idea is, though, if you get a suite of native plants and vegetation working on your shoreline, you have less mowing and less work on that shoreline over time. You're still going to have some invasive species control, or maybe you're keeping your nice drifts of plants nice and tidy by pulling, rogue plants that get into those drifts of plants out after you're planting, and so on. You also have to water your plants in the first couple of years, make sure they get good and strong. But overall, shoreline restoration can lead to less maintenance. It can beautify your lake shore. I think Evonne and Bill will talk about how they've seen a little change on their lake, but basically that suite of plants is also beautiful and has creates seasonal interest and beauty that you can enjoy throughout the year. You see here, this is the North Lakeland Discovery Center Birding Club up in Manitowish Waters. They had a big blowdown event, took all their matured trees down on their shoreline, and this is the birding group helping do the shoreline restoration. So we can support wildlife, fish. How many of you came to the lake to see something like a loon or an eagle or an osprey on a regular basis? Yeah, and these water birds really depend on this habitat. When did you start getting eagles back here in Rock area? 5 years ago. Yeah, so that is really a success story. Okay, and seeing the birds more frequently. Because about in the 1970s, 50 years ago now, wow, man, I'm dating myself. I never felt old, but I'm feeling more and more like I am getting there. But back in the 70s with the DDT problem, it impacted the shells of these birds when they tried to nest, and the shells became brittle, and we really had a problem. In Wisconsin, we were down to 100 or so breeding pairs of eagles across the state. Now we're over 1,500, I believe. And that's why Rock County and some of your southern counties here are now starting to get to enjoy these beautiful water birds again. So we can change our tune as humans and do good things that help us move in the direction we want to. We can also deal with that storm water. Instead of that dirty water getting to the lake, let's manage it on our property and intercept those pollutants and so on. And just we can have fun enjoying a native garden. How many of you just basically like to garden on your own? Yeah. And so you can think of your shoreline as a native garden and just adding another piece to the garden picture on your shoreline. We often talk about there's 3 approaches to doing shoreline restoration. And basically they're right there, 1, 2, and 3. We can protect an intact. If you have something that looked like that first slide I had up there with my demonstration shoreline, you're in pretty good shape. You have those 3 tiers of vegetation. Maybe you have some aquatic plants growing in the near shore area. What's your job in that scenario? Just keep it going. Maybe watch out for invasive species, and your job is basically to just protect and keep that shore healthy, and you don't have to do too much. Another solution can be just put the lawnmower away and let a swath of vegetation start regrowing. You'd be amazed at A, Mother Nature's ability to heal, and B, oftentimes the native plant seed bank is still intact and in the soil, and you'll see some great vegetation come back. The word of caution with the no-mow approach is just watch out for invasive species. You got to get on that early, and you don't want a scenario where you have a reed canary patch when you thought you were growing some nice grass along your shoreline. And Lisa could help with that too, but really the most popular approach, if you will, to shoreline restoration is the so-called accelerated recovery approach, which just is fancy lingo to say we jumpstart the restoration process by putting a suite of plant material back, the wildflowers, ferns, grasses, and sedges on the ground, and then some of that woody vegetation, shrubs and trees, small trees, to jumpstart and to try and get back those 3 tiers of vegetation. So we use a suite of these trees, shrubs, and ground cover plants. And then we also sometimes use Biodegradable materials like biologs, bags, called delta lock bags that interlock, sediment logs, soil lifts, and other tools. Basically, natural materials in concert with the native plantings to maybe control some of the erosion on the site and to get us where we're improving both aquatic and wildlife habitat and dealing with an erosion problem. Some of the measures of our success: are we reducing that water? Are we making that water, instead of shooting to the lake, are we finding a place for it to nicely infiltrate? And basically we're slowing that water down, trying to spread that flow out and get it to absorb back into the landscape. Are we reducing bank erosion or the erosion problem that we have? Before we started here today, I was just walking the bank along the Legion here, and I could see some erosion signs just from foot traffic. I'm sure there's a nice row of fisher people all along here during parts of the year. Again, is there ways we can use a suite of native plants or the way we manage the shore to deal with lessening the erosion? Are we increasing the plant abundance and diversity in wildlife habitat? Other measures. And it's really important, these layers of vegetation. So here's what I'm talking about, that forest duff. And it literally acts like a sponge. Also, those roots are stabilizing the soil. I think I have pictures later on, but some of our sedges, 4-6 feet into the ground. Other prairie grasses, Indian grass, little blue stem, 10 feet into the ground. Something like a prairie blazing star, 10 feet of root structure. So it's not only holding the soil, but the other important thing those roots do is about a third of them die back every year. And those channels that they leave in the soil are allowing another mechanism for that water to find its way into the ground. So again, I think you're starting to get the mantra here, 3 tiers of vegetation. And we have state standards that we utilize, the Shoreline Habitat Standard and the Stream Bank and Shoreline Protection Standard that guide our activity here. And then we also have other tools in the toolbox. This Wisconsin Engineering Field Handbook basically goes through the bioengineering techniques. And I'll show you a website. If you're interested, you can go find this stuff. And then same with the shoreline habitat. But basically, this is an example from Healthy Lakes. We get some woody vegetation in there. We want about a third to half of the planting to be of the grass, sedge, and rush variety. Again, these are the workhorse species with deep root structures that really hold the soil. And then that ground layer of wildflowers. And don't forget about ferns. Ferns can just be wonderful plants in terms of the way they soak up water, but also they're beautiful, and they really are tough on the landscape as well. I was also asked to just give you, I know this is a busy slide, don't pretend like you have to read it, it's just more there so I can give you what I call the 10 steps to shoreline restoration. Lisa might have her own idea, but the idea is just some thought processes, 10 things maybe to think about as we're going through the process of shoreline restoration, such that lead us to a sound, good project that's going to get us the goals that we are trying to achieve. And so initially it's about a landowner meeting. Folks like Patricia who work for Land and Water Shops, they do great outreach. You might work with a consultant like Lisa or both to get you to where you're learning about your property, you're learning about what your conditions are. You're starting to see, where that erosion problem is, or starting to maybe identify, we never use this area over here on the edge of the shore. Why don't we put that back into native vegetation? Again, just starting to discuss what might be possible, and if you have some of those issues with water moving around your property or other challenges, let's talk about them and see what we can do about them. The second step, start sketching out what do we know about the site? Do we know where existing vegetation is? Do we know where we want to put the planting? Do we know where the hot spots are for erosion? Where are the utility lines? Where's the house? And basically just starting sketching out the lay of the land, what we have for everything from the biological features of your site, like plant communities, to the inventory of hard structures and human use, to the soil conditions. Do I have dry soils in the upland? Do I have wet soils right down near the shore? Do I have, maybe over here in this part of the yard, I have a depression area that's more of even a wetland, and so on. Starting to identify, what do I have for conditions? The third step is to start to identify, learning from that assessment of our property, what's possible and where I want to go as a landowner in terms of goals and desires. And you might phase that. You might have a whole bunch of goals, but we can't do everything at once. Maybe we start with a small rain garden or start with a little native planting and then do another project a year or two out. Then again, analyzing your site, starting to identify where we're going to do our plantings or other strategies around erosion control. We might go to a reference area on their lake. What we call reference areas are basically an intact shoreline on your lake that has those 3 tiers of vegetation. We go to that area, we can look at what kind of vegetation is there, and that can inform us about what we might think about for using on our own property. And so it sounds like you've done some cool work at the park and other places on your lake where you could go look at good intact shorelines and see what's there for plant life, and that informs you and helps lead you to where you want to go in your restoration. I didn't see number 5 there. Not sure what 5 is. We're going to go to 6. Designing erosion control solutions. So this is where, if you do have an erosion control, you're going to call up a consultant like Lisa or get your land and water shop out there, and maybe with a Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection engineer. And that suite of people are helping you identify what the erosion challenges are on your property and what's in the toolbox to help you address it. The other thing you might begin to do is just map out how you're going to treat these different areas on your property. And again, it might be a phased approach. You can't do everything at once. Let's bite off what we can chew. The 7th step is to start thinking about how are we going to care for our installed planting and or erosion control strategies after they're installed. So what maintenance steps are there involved? Who's doing the watering? Who's doing the invasive species control? Who's going to make sure when the bergamot jumps from its nice little spot here to over here where the prairie smoke is, well, who's going to pull that out and make sure it gets back in the bergamot where it's supposed to be, and so on. Compile your final conservation plan, and then you install your conservation plan on the ground, whether it's just a simple native planting or maybe it involves these other erosion control type things. And then we get into maintenance. So that's kind of my intro for shorelines. Basically, it's those 2 big picture items we're trying to do. We're trying to slow water down, get it to go to safe places, if you will, on the property to infiltrate instead of that dirty water, bringing that sediment, that phosphorus to the lake. And then the other part is trying to maintain some of that habitat, as much of the 3-tiered approach on the shoreline. So with that, Bill and Evonne are going to tell you the story of how they've worked on their property a little bit in Beaver Dam, and then I'll come back and we'll talk more about erosion.
This is the,
Yeah, forward is that one, backward, red is
and
the
then
pointer.
Good. Thanks for joining me. Good morning. My name's Bill Boettge. I'm president of the Beaver Dam Lake Improvement Association. We're really happy to be down here with you to share a little experience of what we've done with up in Beaver Dam Lake, primarily with the Healthy Lakes project. It's about in 2015, when I first started reading in Lake Tides. I believe I got started there, and then up at the conference at Stevens Point, I heard about this project where we could do things along our shoreline to improve our shorelines and stop runoff, improve the lake, etc., with this program called Healthy Lakes. And I thought, well, man, we sure should get involved in that from the standpoint of not only our own property, but we have 800 homes on the lake, and we do have a major phosphorus problem, and we all contribute to that, whether we're a landowner or whether we're in the agriculture community. And I liked it from the standpoint of, and I really brought that point home in the last year or so when we started working closely with the agriculture community and with the farmers, and we're asking them to do a lot of things with cover crop, no-till, crop rotation, buffers, and all of that. And you still talk to the agriculture people, and you ask them, you say, look at all our problems in our lake. Well, that's from your lawns and everything. And well, we kind of know from records that it's not all of our lawns. We're a contributor, though. So I can say to the agriculture community what we're doing our share also by working with Healthy Lakes and other things to prevent runoff from our property. So I use it as a leverage to kind of encourage them to do more too. So it's a, from that standpoint, not only does it help our lake, but it helps us work with agriculture. And just as a sidebar to that, I think that's one of the key things we've done in Dodge County now is working, the lakes groups are working with the agriculture in improving the quality of our lakes. I spend 50% of my time now working with agriculture as opposed to just working with my lake. But as I said, in 2015, when I saw this project, I convinced our board we got to go with it. Yeah, there's a little bit of work. You process the applications. You have to, your association is responsible now. You apply for the grant that the individual property owner comes through you to get the grant. And those are nice grants. They're up to $1,000 for putting in your native plant or your native planting, or for your rain garden, or for your coarse woody habitat, your tree fish sticks. And so all of those projects are great, and I don't know, we have right now 13 projects on the lake, and we have 2 more approved for this year. So we're very pleased that we're making slope project. Why isn't everybody involved in it? That's a good question. I don't know why. To me, it's not that hard, and with Lisa working with us, if you don't want to do the work yourself, there's plenty of other landscape people around to do it, but Evonne and I enjoy doing it ourselves, and we'll give a little background on how we did ours. So we've been doing it, as I said, for 3 years now. We've been processing it. Yes, we have responsibility as a property owner. I sign a pledge that I'll keep it there and maintain it for a minimum of 10 years. And we, as a lake association, are responsible to see that that is done. So we go around and check ours periodically. But all of our property owners, I'm not really worried about the liability. I heard a little concern at the Lakes Conference this year. Some lake associations were concerned about that. To me, that's not a reason for not doing it. There's so many more reasons for doing it that I wouldn't be concerned about that. So what do? We've got some, I think this is kind of a drawing from Healthy Lakes. We do some native plantings along the shoreline. We do rain gardens. We've had some rock diversions where we've done, and I'll show you some pictures of those. Coarse woody habitat. We haven't had any of those with individuals, but we as a lake have gotten a grant, and we put in 6 of those this winter. And we're excited about them. We have some native ones up there, but there's more areas that we could do for that. And we think that's habitat restoration for our fishing is as important as stocking, or more important than stocking our lakes, because that's where the fish can populate, and good spawning areas, everything. So there's a lot of good things that can be done and are being done by that. When we got to ours, we're a typical John Deere country lakes. This is our shoreline. As you can see, this is before we laid it out. What do we have? We've got lawn, more than she would like, and I agree with her, and we've been putting a lot into gardens, but when we found out about native plantings along the shoreline, we said, well, this is a no-brainer for us. So with that, we decided to go ahead and do that, and I'll let Evonne take over on how we picked the plants and what we did.
There used to be a number of willow trees about 40 years ago or so. Someone went around the entire lake, which is 42 miles, and planted willow trees everywhere. And they've been dying, so the willow trees are all gone, and we have this lawn instead. Bill handed me the grant application for the Healthy Lakes project and said, you need to fill this out so we can get it submitted. So part of that application includes a design plan for what your garden is going to look like. So the garden is 35 feet long and 10 feet wide. And I wanted a native garden that didn't grow too high, that had pink and blue flowers. So out of the list that came from the DNR, I decided what plants were going to go in there. And there are 5 shrubs, 4 different kinds of grasses,
a number, and 4 different kinds of wildflowers in blues and pinks that I thought would look pretty together in kind of a clump area, so they're not all in a row. Plants don't grow in a row. One of the things I did not do was have the soil tested, which I should have, and I would recommend that to everybody, to know what your soil balance is and to pick the right plant to grow in the right place. But this is a nice sunny area, so I was pretty lucky that they all grew pretty well. So I wanted plants that looked like they were at least 2 years old. I didn't want any seeds because I'm not very good at growing seeds. So I worked with Shane Height Gardens in Sun Prairie to get the plants that I wanted, and this is a substantial investment. The whole car was full of these plants when I got home. There's about 180 of them in there. So I was really thankful for the grant opportunity to help us pay for those. My budget was a little more than Bill thought it was going to be. So, so once we had the grass taken care of, we set the plants out where they were supposed to go. And like I said, we put them in clumps so they get a more natural look. And the higher plants were designed to go in the middle so that when you looked at it from the lake, you could still see the plants in the middle or from the yard. So that's what happened. The entire garden gets about 4 feet tall in the middle, so you can still see the lake really well. Our house is a little elevated, so you still get to see the water. You don't forget there's a lake out there, because that's an issue for a lot of people. It does help keep the geese away really, really well. And the aster plants got really big, but I found out that you can cut those back by 1/3 in the early, when they're growing, and they'll still get just as tall as they would have if you would have let them grow. So they turn out really well. So they're all perennial plants. They come back every spring. They do need a little bit of attention. It isn't quite, no work at all, but I like working in the garden. So every now and then I go out there and I remulch and I pick out the weeds or move a plant that got away and isn't where it's supposed to be. We did add a tree, and we are thinking about enlarging that garden so it's even bigger. When it starts to mature, it shows lots of color, and the grasses add some interest. The blooming continues all summer long, so there's always something blooming in the garden. One of my favorite flowers in here is called hoary vervain. It's a stalk flower that blooms from the bottom up, and it gets little seeds on it. So the birds and the butterflies really like it, and it looks really cool during the winter too. So it's a really pretty bright blue-violet color. It's almost fluorescent. It's just gorgeous. So the garden in full bloom looks like this when it comes to the fall, and then I cut some of it back before winter, but a lot of it I just leave there until the spring, because all the little critters really like it, and the butterflies love it too. So we have lots and lots of butterflies in that garden.
We had a, Pat remembers, the Healthy Lakes team got an award for team effort and doing a good job with the Healthy Lakes. And rather than giving the award in Madison and have a brick building in the background, they came up to Beaver Dam, and the director was not, well, was
Kurt
it?
Leedy, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
Kurt came up to make the
our
award to
leaders,
them.
yep.
Yep. And what was really cool, a butterfly landed on his shoulder. But that thing
Wasn't
was,
staged.
that thing was just loaded with butterflies, and we have frogs in there, and what else did we see going through there? But we're very proud of it, it's very pretty, and we're gonna do more of them, because, I mean, what's there not to like about that? And now, if there is any runoff from that grass, it has to go filter through there before it hits the lake. And that's what it's all about, and we're proud to be a part of it. I'm just gonna show you a couple of the other ones that are on our lake. And this is our Vice President Bill Foley's garden, and it's down by the shoreline there, and there's some vegetation in the shore too, but that's the one that he did. Got a little planter. He's got ducks and everything going in his. So a very successful native planting garden. And then here's another one along another shoreline with a little slope. You can see some similarities between it, but we have a high energy lake because it's a pretty good 6,000 acres. So most of our shorelines has to be rip-wrapped. So we don't have nice, gentle shorelines. So we have to protect them with riprap, and then we put the native plantings up in there. So that's another successful garden that we have. And here's a rain garden by Carolyn and Aida. And Pat was up at this one. This is on the edge. You can see the lake in the background there, but this is where the rain runoff goes through here, and she made a very nice rain garden out of that one. So that's another area that you consider for one of your healthy lakes. We had one of our members that had a problem with runoff from their impervious surface of their garage and their utility buildings, and you'll even see a drawing like that. It's almost the same thing that they showed, and so they did that, and that's another project that we did on the lakes. And then to kind of wrap it up, when we first went around the first year, that's Pat there with Pam and myself and Bill Foley from the lake, and putting in our stake for our healthy lakes. That was pretty late in the fall already. It was pretty dried out by that time, but the team, one thing I want to mention, when we were first concerned, and the paperwork at first was a little confusing to me, but don't worry about it. They made it simpler, and they don't mind helping at all. And I thought I was asking a lot of dumb questions, and maybe they were, but it didn't bother them, and we got through it, and all of ours have been approved, and we're very proud of what we've done for the Beaver Dam Lake, and we're very happy that the DNR and the University Extension, et cetera, have put this program into effect, not only for Beaver Dam Lake, but for all of our Wisconsin lakes as we try to improve them. So, any questions? Yes?
Do you have like a wall before you started your garden? Is it like a cement and then the garden?
Yeah, well, we changed that too in the last, because we didn't like, it was built, when they built the house in '87, they built kind of a seawall. We have now taken that out, and we just have a rock layer that goes out into the lake. But yes,
What was the name of the place in Sun Prairie where you got your perennials?
Shane Height Gardens,
Shane Heights?
Shane Height, SCHOENHEIT.
there's a list, and Lisa has one, and other, they're available through the Prairie Gardens, another good catalog, and when Lisa's in her presentation, I'm sure she'll have some of the places that where you
On the
can.
Healthy Lakes website as well, there's a
That's-
list of native plant nurseries and consultants like Lisa on there too, so you can start to connect with these resources.
So, thank you very much. We're glad to be here, and good luck with your lake and your projects.
Well, I thank Bill and Evonne as well. They've been great champions. They've come to our Wisconsin Lakes Convention in Stevens Point and helped talk about healthy lakes. And to tell you the truth, that's where the power is. This is a neighbor-to-neighbor kind of discussion and neighbor-to-neighbor kind of phenomena in terms of helping folks on the lake understand how these small steps, these best practices in healthy lakes can lead us to cleaner water and better habitat. The next part we're going to roll into is just a quick discussion of erosion. One of the biggest things that brings people to the table to think about working on their lakeshore is a challenge with erosion on their property. And so we thought it'd be worth showing you the causes of erosion, spend a little time on what it looks like and how you identify it, and then get into the toolbox a little bit to talk about some of the treatments that go, and the Healthy Lakes will introduce you to that too, the 5 best practices. Some of these slides are from one of our DATCAP engineers. The Department of Ag, Culture, Trade, and Consumer Protection has a conservation engineering section, and they partner with the land and water conservation departments across the state of Wisconsin, supporting the work of shoreline work as well as a bunch of agricultural and other conservation practices. So she helps us with the lakeshore training, and these slides are from there. Causes of erosion, well, it has to do with the soils, the landscape, and the glaciation, the geologic history of the site. It will also depend on your weather conditions, what's your rainfall, what's going on in terms of climate. Very importantly, and maybe you're starting to clue in on this, the vegetation of that shoreline, what's capable of growing, what kind of root structures are alive and well on that shore, is the location of your shoreline wind susceptible, and so on. What's going on with water? Basically, whether it's the upland movement of water, or it could be wave action and water as it relates to the lake itself. And then just the human activity patterns. Where are we walking around the property and accessing it? How are we using the property? Can all be drivers into what's going on with erosion. Active things, so just as rain falls or precipitation falls, the energy of that and the runoff that comes from that can cause situations and challenges with erosion. Waves, either from wind or boating. I think we're seeing maybe more even so in the south and the north. Some of these wave boats are out there and other things that are creating even more waves on our lakes, and that wave energy can have a toll on the shoreline. And if we don't have those 3 tiers of vegetation and some of that woody structure, you may really get into some serious challenges with erosion. The currents, if we're in a situation along a stream and or maybe it's a drainage lake where we have an inflow and an outflow, we might have a current that is also a driver. Groundwater seeps. This is a challenge I see quite a bit with our work, is once in a while the water from the ground wants to pop itself up and find a way to release. And that can be a scenario that can be a little tricky in deciphering what's going on. And once we do, though, we can use some tools in the toolbox to deal with groundwater seeps. Ice impact. I don't know how you're doing on Rock Lake if you have a lot of ice action. I'm seeing Patricia nod her head. And this year was crazy for ice, at least where I live up north. But ice, you know, that wind can shift in one day, and all it takes is a wind coming with some strong energy for one day, and you can have ice pile up. I grew up on Lake Winnebago and remember ice, you know, 2 stories tall kind of a deal. So ice. And one of the things we've done, and we'll see some pictures later, is lakes, their defense mechanism for ice was to create ice ridges, bumps at the lakeshore edge. And a lot of times what we've done when we sculpted our lakeshore homes 50, 100 years ago was we took those ice ridges out, and that was really one of the barriers the lake forms to protect the shoreline. So sometimes that ice ridge will start to reform, and it's a good idea to let it form because it can protect your shoreline. We could certainly have interfacing with either livestock animals or humans as well. As I said, when I walked out in front of the shore here, I saw some bare spots just from fisher-person activity. And so part of the challenge there is there a way we can, okay, we know folks are using the shore here, can we put a little platform for fisher people so that they go to a designated place and we're keeping the erosion from happening on the site kind of thing. But as I say in my first part of the talk, a lot of what has heightened erosion on lakeshore properties has been the removal of both vegetation in the water and vegetation and wood in the water, and then the vegetation on that shoreline. Some kind of alteration of those 3 tiers of vegetation. There's some guides out there. This is a guide. I'm going to show you a website where you can go find some of this stuff. This is a cool book from the Tip of the Mitt, Watershed Council group in the Upper Michigan area, I believe, but they have a understanding living with and controlling shoreline erosion guide, which is kind of neat. And this person is in the audience today. That's Lisa's book. She has a neat little book on controlling shoreline erosion, so perhaps she can talk to you about that. So some of the examples of erosion here. Well, this one's pretty straightforward. This is a scenario where I'm not sure how this was permitted, but beyond that, that hard surface is quite a challenge in terms of runoff right into the lake. And so I'm sure at some point this was probably pulled out, or maybe this is even a Wisconsin lake. In fact, maybe that's mountains in the back, but this would have a serious impact. Here's an example of a gully. You can see the sediment plume down into the lake. This was loose, sandy soils. I think this is up in Vilas County where we had an overland flow event, a rainfall event, and it just literally washed a gully down into the lake. And so controlling that overland flow so it doesn't get to the lake can be a really key part of erosion control. This is an example of pounded lakeshore edge, sugar sandy situation, pretty steep, where they've just had boat waves coming over and over and over the years, and you can see over time the sand just degrades and the root wads of these plants are exposed, and we start to get undercutting of the bank. And as that bank gets undercut, it gets destabilized and it'll slump down and continue to be a problem. Here's an example of the same kind of thing on a river. So the shear stress on this river bend got to the point where it was just too much, and then you see the vegetation is even trying to start healing from Mother Nature's jumped right in and is starting to regrow in that area. Here's more of an example on a flowage. So you got a big up and down jump and movement on a flowage. Well, part of the story of flowages is those soils didn't originally grow up on a lake, so to speak. And so these sandy soils, when exposed to erosive forces, really don't hold up well in the flowage situation, and this whole peninsula is suffering. Here's an example of that seepage scenario I was talking about. So this is a park up in the Northwoods where, for doggone it, we just couldn't figure out what was going on with this bank, and finally, after doing some assessments and measurements, we figured out that there was a groundwater seep coming right down so there's a county park here with a nice pavilion, and it was coming right through the park, and then it popped literally out of the side of the bank on the lake side of the property, and it was causing this erosion. So basically the solution here was to put a trench up in the upland area to grab that water, and instead of it coming down to the lake, the trench diverted the water to an infiltration area where it could get back into the ground. Here's another shot of the same kind of thing. Flowage gets lessened, and the overland flow is just too much for those loose soils to take, and we start to get some gullying and erosion. Here's an example where you have an old seawall. A lot of times you do more damage than good taking something like that out. It might be best just to leave it. But you can see the Mother Nature is starting to eat away at this shore. Again, what's here for vegetation? Not much. If we had those 3 tiers of vegetation, especially that ground layer of grasses, sedges, and rushes with those deep roots, this shoreline would be in much better shape. Human factors, boy, that's a steep shoreline. These folks have been trying to jury rig something together to get to access to, and we all understand that. We want to love our lake and enjoy it, but sometimes it's such a steep slope, we probably could have done a better job on how we got down here such to, and I noticed in your survey, you have a lot of stairs going down to your lake, and so I'd pay attention to that. When we talk about healthy lakes, we have some low-growing options in terms of planting plans, and you might use those low-growing vegetation around those stairwells to shore up that soil, to hold it down, and to avoid some of that erosion problem. Here's an example. This is foot traffic. This was a popular fishing spot, and people just would jump up and down the bank, up and down the bank, up and down the bank, and over time, after a few years of that, the sandy soils just couldn't handle the weight of people going up and down anymore, and it collapsed. And so, again, if we know someone's loving the lake and using it, why don't we try to create a small little fishing area, designate it, and then make sure that the human use pattern isn't abusing the lake in that way, and we'll be better off. People still love the lake, enjoying it, but we're being a little more smarter in terms of the way they access it. Here's an example of an ice dam on a stream. Just the power of ice can be amazing. It's a bulldozer in wintertime kind of deal. And so if we have one of those ice ridges, let's leave it. If wood falls in the water, let's leave it, because boy, when that ice comes, that wood helps break it up and dissipate that energy. And again, if we have 3 tiers of vegetation at the shoreline, and maybe a plant like alder and some of these other shrubs that creep out a little into that shallow water, they act like a mangrove swamp. They literally hold back and absorb that energy as it comes, whether it's ice or waves, and hits the shore. Here's an example where we had ice push on the lake, and look at this tree. It just stood firm kind of deal, but the ice just literally pounded all around this. And this is kind of what an ice ridge would look like. Over time, Mother Nature basically creates this natural bump, and what happens is, instead of that sheet of ice just being a plow coming to the lakeshore, it gets propped up on this ice ridge, and then it cracks and dissipates, and it's not as erosive and strong from an energy production point of view. So if we have those wood in the water and those ice ridges, it can help protect the shore. Here's an example of what I mean. See how this ice pushed the soil up? If we let this over time just settle down and create this ridge as I'm talking about, and then vegetate it with some of these low-growing shrubs and sedges and grasses that have these deep roots, we have that armoring of protection that can really serve us well in protecting our shore. You see how much soil has been lost here? So this person's lost a couple feet of shore. And, you know, just this tree alone is probably helping protect that shore compared to the neighbor. Here's another example where you see the grass and sedge community on this homeowner's shoreline is holding the shore pretty well. This landowner had nothing but lawn. It took no less than 5 years for them to lose 5 feet of shoreline in this scenario. Again, the suite of native plant material, and look, the view corridor is still there. We can still see the lake. We can still enjoy the lake. And then let's have our access points. You can see some wood in the water here as well, and aquatic vegetation also protecting the shore. I don't know if we're going to go through some examples a little later for the fetch business. I'm not even sure where that's at. But again, one of the things we do when we try to come up with the techniques to deal with erosion control is we assess the energy of the site. And so how much fetch or how much distance from across the lake, here's my property here. If this is a half mile or a mile, a big lake like Bill talked about, that's a lot of energy that's hitting that lake shore. And so you might need hard armoring in that scenario and use a little riprap in tandem with bioengineering and or the native planting. Basically, you know, different types of erosion are present. And again, we can keep the geese out. So look at nothing stopping the geese. If we put a good 2 foot, 3 foot, you know, spirea or sweet gale, or down here it would probably be water willow, or maybe, do you use spireas? What is your go-to shrub? Yeah, if it's drier, blueberries would work, sweet fern. But again, just some vegetation there at that land-water interface that's a foot or two high, the geese won't come and disturb and poop all over your nearshore area. Believe it or not, these guys can generate up to 6 pounds of poop a week, and that can get us sick if it's in the water around our swimming areas and so on. So we use these biological erosion control methods, or so-called bioengineering techniques. It might be fiber rolls like this, which are made out of coconut, or some are now being made here in the Midwest out of, I believe it's pulp, hardwood pulp-based fibers. But these fiber rolls work in more low energy scenarios where we can tuck them in under that receding shoreline, and they can help keep things intact while that native vegetation planting right behind it gets jump started for a few years. Something like live stakes. Basically, these are dogwoods or willow stakes that we just cut in nature, and we pump them right into the ground in that nearshore area, or between rocks and riprap can work well as well. And they pop these beautiful shrubs up, and again, they're doing that heavy work of holding the shore. Brush mattresses, brush layering, also techniques out there. But the key is these materials are biodegradable, and they're living organic things that break down over time. The idea is you're using these bioengineering materials to hold the shore in the short term while that native planting behind it gets going. Those 3 tiers of vegetation come back, and then you have your intact shore and strong shoreline again. And we've been doing this for years. This is a picture from China in the 1900s, them doing live stems and different brush bundles along a riverbank. So we figured we've been doing this for a while to try and stabilize soil and use live material like this along them. So these are all other examples here. So it could be native plantings. We mentioned core logs. Vegetated core maps or other kinds of erosion control blankets are great. So if we're worried about that bare soil during the first couple months of the planting, we can put a straw mat down, put an X into it, put our plants right in the ground, and it protects that soil while those plants get established. You saw in Evonne's planting, it took about 1.5 years for it to fill out that whole plant bed. And so you can use the erosion control blanket to protect the area in the short term. You see, these are live stakes examples down here in this picture. This is a website here that I wanted to let you know if you really want to jump into the world of bioengineering and erosion control. This is a portal for the Wisconsin Lakeshore Restoration Project, a project up in the northern part of the state where for 10 years up in Vilas County, we restored literally thousands of linear feet of shoreline. And what we did is we had control lakes out in the state forest, which were very similar to the 4 lakes we worked on with the study. And we did baseline surveys in both places for birds, for birds, small mammals, plant life, and some other measurements. And then for 10 years, and then we restored a bunch of shorelines on the 4 lakes that were not in the control. And we did the same measurements for 10 years on these properties to see, did we get the wildlife returning? Did we get some cleaner water and so on? The other thing you'll see on this, if you look under techniques, you'll see a fact sheet and a little description for each one of the techniques we use. So I just mentioned a few of them: live stakes, core logs, and so on. You can look at each one of those techniques, get a fact sheet, and learn about what these erosion control techniques are. And then there's just basic tips about doing shoreline restoration. So this is the long website. The short news is, if you Google UW Extension Lakes and then hit Lakeshore Restoration, that's how you can find it. So UW Extension Lakes on the UWSP website and Lakeshore Restoration, you can find this portal. Why native plants? Well, these native plants are in rhythm with the insect life and the climate of the area, the soils of the area. They also provide food and shelter for that wildlife. And they basically have survival rates that are going to make it affordable, and in the long run, they can reduce your maintenance costs. And they have these deep roots. So here's an example of some of these plants. Here's grass, Kentucky bluegrass over here. Look at those deep roots. Sorry, it's only about 6 inches. Versus some of these forbs and grasses literally get down into the ground like this and really anchor that soil, hold the soil, and allow for that infiltration. And here's just an example. These are only 1 year old. These are root structures from, looks like a bunch of sedges on the top here. So fox sedge, Carex stipata, and Carex hystracina. But look at the fibrous roots of these plants. And that's only 1 year old. In a couple more years, that'll be 2, 3, 4 feet down into the ground. These are some of the native plants. This is that beautiful, one of the vervains. You mentioned hoary vervain. This is Verbena hastata. Again, fibrous roots. This is the false sunflower, and there's black-eyed Susan. These beautiful fibrous roots, though, are doing the heavy lifting for us. There's some more. There's marsh milkweed, one of the asters, swamp aster, and there's blue joint grass. Again, these fibrous root structures that really hold the soil. One of the things I like to encourage is drifts of plants perpendicular to the action. This is a picture from the Chicago Botanical Gardens. If you ever get a chance, it's a really beautiful place. They have 5 miles of linear shoreline there in the urban lakes in this Chicago area garden. And they've done 4.5 miles of lakeshore restoration on these shorelands. They had a 5-inch rain event last year that was up to here and covered these plants for 8 days with water. The water receded, that shoreline didn't move an inch. Every one of those plants was still in the ground. They were dirty, they were full of scum, they were nasty looking, but they held the soil, they did the job. And so the approach at the Chicago Botanical Gardens is a couple. They have these drifts that are perpendicular to shore. So here's, I'm not sure if that's one of our rumexes. Here's one of the emergent, I don't know if there's arrowhead in there. Our sedges and grasses start to get at that land-water interface. The idea here is, though, we put a whole bunch of these native plants in these drifts perpendicular to shore such that we provide that structure, and then we get into our woody plants and our vertical 3 tiers of vegetation on the shoreline. Here's what I'm talking about for some of those shrubs. This is can't tell if that's sweet gill or leatherleaf, but there's the suite of plants that grow in this land-water interface, and you see how this plant is creeping over the water, and literally the waves hit that, and it just acts like a shock absorber, or it looks like a buoy out there in the lake, and it absorbs that energy. And then you see the woody structure and the lilies, the water lilies, also helping dissipate that energy. So if we can get this low-growing wall of armoring on our shoreline, we're going to have that protection we need. The other thing important about that woody vegetation is if we love pollinators, birds and butterflies, that's what feeds them early in the season. Other than garlic mustard, and dandelions, there's not a lot flowering out there other than woody vegetation right now. And so if you know Doug Talemi's work with Bringing Nature Home and how we can work with wildlife, he's a lepidopterist or a butterfly and moth guy. And basically, he's counted how many moths and butterflies use these different native plants. An oak tree, for example, 547 different species of moths and butterflies. That's not even to say who's using all the acorns that fall off that tree. Another 60, 70 animals are using the acorns. 60 birds use oaks to cavity nest, and so on. So again, if we're trying to choose species that help wildlife, Doug's helping us learn that maybe an oak tree is a way to go because of all these benefits it has. Conversely, how many of you heard of the plant buckthorn? Yeah, oh, I heard a groan. Buckthorn, one of our nasty invasive species, 10 species of moth and butterflies will utilize buckthorn. So again, why do we use native plants? Well, that's what wildlife is looking for. So check out Doug's work. He's really helping us all see the value of these native plants. And maybe we start thinking about some of these other values. You know, a lot of times it was the decoration and the view and the look of the plants, but maybe now we start to choose our plants, we can keep aesthetics in mind, but maybe we also think about how does it support the food web and help those birds and butterflies? Or how does it deal with the swings in weather that we're getting now in our state? Or how does it help with holding the soil and restoring the soil health over time and so on? Here's an example of what many of our lake shores might look like. See what I mean by the canopy staying there? So a lot of folks are cool with leaving the canopy, but what suffers is that mid layer, no shrub layer, and the ground layer is just our lawn. So part of what our discussion here today is trying to get us to think about is, can we take a look at our shoreline properties and find little areas? Are we really using this? Are we really using this area? Maybe we could put that back into native plants. Or, you see how we have some roofs here? The good news here is the roofs are going this way versus towards the lake. But can we catch the water off this roof and divert it to this wooded area? Same with this landowner. Again, what are the tools, or how can we maybe think about doing our property different? Same with this property. I got a feeling there's some water coming down here and causing some challenges. That's why all this rock is piled up here, I'm sure, in part, whether it's the roof runoff or the like. So can we grab this gutter runoff and create a little rain garden and infiltration area? Maybe we put a native planting right here to help absorb some of this, or a rain garden to help absorb this. They're doing a great job over here with leaving some vegetation, but maybe we enhance it with a native planting, for example. Here's an example from a bar with a boat access. You know, this is, to me, these are the kinds of dead spaces. You see here how there's a little culvert delivering some water. Boy, that's a perfect place to intercept that water. Instead of it shooting down to the lake, can we put a native planting, a rain garden, or an infiltration practice in to catch it? And so I just want to walk you through the 5 Healthy Lakes best practices. We've been hitting at them a little bit. Patricia's going to talk more about how you can work moving forward with these, but we've divided the lakeshore property into these 3 zones. In the lake zone, that transition or buffer zone, the 35-foot zone right next to the lake, and then the upland area, and trying to get us all to think about our properties and the work of lakes in a more holistic, whole property kind of way versus just maybe thinking about the nearshore area. And so the 5 best practices are, what's the first one? Fish sticks, getting that woody habitat back in the water. The second, native plantings. The third is a water bar. We'll talk more about all these. Here's the infiltration pit, and then here is the rain garden. So fish sticks are these large pieces of wood, 100, 150-foot mature trees. We take them from an upland area, 3 to 5 mature pieces of wood. And typically, this work is done in the wintertime, where we drag the 3 trees or 5 trees out onto the lake, and then we anchor them in with duckbill anchors to an existing tree, and we set them up in this pattern along the shore. And then when the ice melts, here's an example of a skid steer moving the material around, and then the ice melts, and that heavy tree gets waterlogged and down into the lake, and look at all this fish habitat. If I'm a fisher person, where am I throwing my lure? I'm going right in here, baby. But that habitat is restored. One of the things we've seen when we put the fish sticks in, and maybe you've seen this in your own projects, is aquatic plants start to show up. The bulrush bed all of a sudden pops in, or the water lilies return, and we start to get aquatic plant growth in areas where we didn't see it before. Why does that happen? because we've quieted that water down just enough now that those aquatic plants have a chance to get established. Here's the native planting idea. Again, it's a minimum of 10 feet, so you can shape it any way you need to. Here's an example of the native planting at the land-water interface. So you might sneak one in here. It could be a block shape that's 19 by 18 feet. You could have, like Bill and Evonne did, 10 by 35 feet. The idea is to fit it into the property the way you can. I think that's one of Lisa's projects. Shoot Lake, maybe, can't remember. But again, we just had this near shore area and snuck it in right next to the stairwell. So like our stairwell discussion before, a lot of stairwells are sometimes delivering water to the lake. Well, if we can put that buffer back at the base of that stairwell, we're intercepting some of those sediments and some of that nutrient. Here's an example of what a planting can look like when it uses one of these fiber mattings. So you see about every foot, foot and a half is one of our plugs put in, and then this matting will hold the shore intact while these plants get established. You see the aquatic plant growth in the water. So we have this Healthy Lakes Native Planting Guide to help you, and for each one of these best practices, there's a fact sheet and one of these companion guides to help you, from a technical information point of view, think about this. We have 6 options for you: lakeshore edge, bird butterfly, bare soil, we're dealing with that erosion problem, low growing, deer resistant, and woodland. So, and then in the guide you see Karen Engelbertson, one of our lake leaders, has created a little diagram showing you how you might lay the plants out in different shapes, fit them into different shorelines. So here's the lakeshore edge. Here's an example of how you might lay the bird butterfly planting out, the second option. Here's the bare soil. And then for each one of these, we have the same suite of plants: woodies, grass, sedges, and rushes, and the wildflowers. So there's bare soil. Again, maybe we just fit it in on the edge of our property line. Here's an example of low growing. So one of the pushbacks from people sometimes is, I don't want to lose my view corridor. I don't want to lose it. Well, we don't want you to lose it either. But the idea is we can use these low growing options of plants. None of these get much higher than my waist, and keep our view corridor, and at the same time get the deep fibrous roots going, get some of that wildlife habitat back. And so this might be the one you think about around your stairwells to help shore things up. Deer resistant, I don't know how you're doing here for deer browse and so on, but up where I live, deer pressure in Vilas County is pretty high, and we need fencing or repellent. So we might go with the deer resistant planting just because of that scenario. And then the woodland, we have a shady scenario. Let's pick a group of plants that work in shade. One of the things we've come to learn is in these native gardens, we can put these cues to care in, or basically signals to our neighbors and to the community that what we're doing is okay. And basically it might be mowed edges, or Evonne mentioned how her planting has something blooming from the start in spring all the way through the growing season. Again, seasonal interest and blooms all through the season. We might put a wildlife feeder up, or a Mickey Mouse sign, or a Go Pack Go, no Viking signs allowed. But again, it's just a little cue to the neighbor saying, hey, you know, I know this looks a little different than what you're used to in terms of lawn, but it's okay. It's doing good things for clean water for the lake, and it's helping our birds and butterflies and other wildlife. And so Joan Nassar, I'm butchering Joan's last name, but she's basically studied how these little cues to care can make a difference in helping us go forward with doing this kind of work. And here's just some more pictures from the botanical garden I just love some of these shoreline pictures, but a lot of forbs in here. You can even put, you know, something like a smoke bush in for variation. Here's a grass sedge line, and then we get into our monarda and other forbs. Here's an example. This is water willow, another one of those shrubs that creeps out over the edge of the lake shore and acts as that shock absorber. So this picture I really love. Here's our row of woody vegetation. Behind it, we have the next phase of grasses and sedges with those deep roots, and then we get into our wildflower part of the buffer on the top end with showier plants and more eye candy kind of stuff. And here's another example. So we have our emergent zone to 18 inches of water with a different kind of arrowhead, maybe some pickerelweed in there. We get into our, looks like we have some iris behind that, some kind of juncus or rush behind that, and then some more wildflowers on the upslope. Again, we can plant in these drifts. So here's a drift or a patch, if you will, of, oh, God, it just popped out of my head. Steeple. Nope, steeple, white, Veronicastrum virginiatum. I can't remember the common name. Culver's root. God darn, it took forever. Here's mountain mint. Here's one of our sedges, you know. But again, these drifts, and you see how they're perpendicular to the shore. So here's the shore, and they're horizontal to the planting area. And then here's one of those cues to care. Just a little mulch right at the edge here shows us kind of where the lawn stops and the native vegetation begins. Just examples of those emergent plants into our grass sedges. Here's another example. We could even put a paver right there at the edge. The other thing I like about this, you see how it has a nice S-curve to it? That's a lot gentler on the eye and more aesthetically pleasing. This is a little nuts. I might pull back a little on the black-eyed Susan here, but it gives you an idea of what a drift can do. Here's another example. We're just using a colorful mulch to show you kind of where we transition from the lawn and the formal area to the more near shore area with all these diversity of plants. We still have our view, and we're still getting what we want out of it. And we can throw some eye candy in. So by all means, throw some saline in like this or something poppy that you like. Here's just another example. So the other practices we've hinted at, so the other practices now, the next three, are more dealing with that water conservation piece, this challenge of how do we get this dirty water and sediment from getting to the lake? How do we deal with that? Well, the first thing we can do is a lot of us might have an access road like this, where basically it's the road itself is what the water is using to get to the lake, right? And a simple tool like a diversion, it could be a broad-based dip, which is a little dip in the road with infiltration rock underneath it, or we can use something called a water bar. This is a flexible piece of rubber across the road. The water hits this, stops, gets diverted into the forest, and infiltrates back in the ground. If we don't have a nice forested area to send the water to, we can use this fourth best practice, the rock infiltration area. Here's an example like Bill was showing us. This is just the drip line from the roof and the French gutter put in to absorb that water. But on the previous picture, if we didn't have a nice woods here, we could put in rock infiltration right there, and then we have a place for that water to go. And then the last, and here's another example. So here's our driveway. It's carrying water down. You can see it's going downhill to the lake. Instead of it keep going, we can slope it. You can see the sediment that's building up here and coming into the rock infiltration pit. This is an example where we can also bring the water to the pit. So in this case, we have an underground gutter coming from the house. We build a trench, and then we have a perforated pipe here, so the water can then bleed out. We roll this erosion control fabric. This is our outtake in case this thing fills up. We roll this erosion control fabric back over the top, put sod right over the top of that, and we're off and running with an infiltration area. And then the fifth and final Healthy Lakes best practice is rain gardens. I call this the twofer. We get both some water conservation work and some habitat. So what's nice about rain gardens is whether it's a downspout from a house or maybe it's the rooftop from the garage or the boathouse, we can capture that water, bring it to the rain garden, which all a rain garden is a small depressional area with a berm on one side, which is just about a foot rise in land, basically, to hold the water in this depressional area. It has soils that can take the water, so you're going to have to do some soils tests to make sure you have the right spot, and use the rain garden guide I saw back on the table. But basically, these rain gardens can be a tool then for absorbing that water and infiltrating it back into the ground, and we can plant migratory bird plants or bird pollinator plants, nectar and host plants that would help pollinators, for example, and so we get both the benefits to wildlife and some water conservation. Here's an example again. This is Carol's rain garden. So basically, we have the rock that's helping slow the water down, and then, oh, this is from Legend Lake. I'm sorry, this isn't Carol's. The reason I wanted to show you this is this has some of those beautiful ferns in it. And in nature, you see this all the time, a big glade like this in a forest just full of interrupted fern or other kinds of ferns, and basically doing the heavy lifting of soaking up water and absorbing it. Here's Carol's rain garden, another pic of that. And so basically, I think her house is over here, and the lake's this way. She grabbed the water coming off this lawn area and intercepted it into a beautiful rain garden. And there you see an example of a little cuticare, a little statue, again, just signaling to the neighbors that, hey, it's okay, this is good stuff. You might have to do some management for protection. Again, we use short-term fencing, or you can use some of the spray products. This is blood meal based, this is garlic based, or get yourself an Anatolian Shepherd. Healthy Lakes is due February 1st, so there's little brochures back there, Healthy Lakes brochures. My contact information's on the back. Please shoot me an email if I can help you. You're in good hands here with Patricia. Hopefully you can connect with Lisa as well. You have other folks in the area, but if I can help you with your project, that's my job. I'm here to do that. And basically it's $1,000 to do any one of those 5 best practices. It's a 75-25% match, and it's a reimbursed grant. So basically, someone at your lake basically volunteers to be a coordinator. They get the landowners who want to do a project together. They sign a little form that says, yep, I'll do a rain garden. And Joe Smith over here says, yep, I'll do a native planting. And basically, that's the information you put into the grant, and you're off and running. We can talk more about this. To date, I think now with 2018, we're up to almost 500 of these best practices across the state. And all over the state, we've been having different activity, and I hope to see Rock Lake here on this map soon. So if I can help you get there, please do. Basically, everything is on this Healthy Lakes website. So if you grab one of the Healthy Lakes brochures over here, you'll see right on the cover this healthylakeswi.com website. And basically, each of the 5 best practices is there, and then for each one, there's a fact sheet and this companion guide to help coach you through how to do it. And then under resources, that's where the lady had a question about nurseries or finding a person like Lisa to work with. You can find lists of consultant and nurseries there, for example. So I encourage you to go check out the Healthy Lakes website. There's a lot of information there to help you get your feet wet, pun intended, with doing Healthy Lakes. With that, I really appreciate, I don't know why I have Buckatama Lakes on there. I thank you, Rock Lake folks, for your attention. I thank you for thinking about working on your properties a little bit, and I'll be around through the morning, and I wish you luck. I think up next is Lisa. Get to hear how a consultant interfaces with these projects and helps make them happen on the ground. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You just set those right there. Thank you very much. Well, I know some people are going to run out and use the restroom, so I will start by introducing myself. My name is Lisa Reas. I am an environmental consultant who's based out of Green Lake. I grew up in a little town called Prentice up in northern Wisconsin, Price County.
Can you speak more toward the mic?
Sure. Is that a little bit better for you? I have 2 little boys, so I'm used to yelling. So usually that
There's the
covers.
mom voice.
Yeah, there's the mom voice. I am a graduate of UW-Stevens Point, go Pointers, and my degree is in watershed management and water chemistry, and I have minors in soils and chemistry. So I've been working with environmental issues for many, many years. My first job out of school is for Polk and Burnett counties in the western part of the state doing restoration design, and this is when Shoreline Restoration first started coming on. I worked for the DNR for a short period of time, and then I started my business in Green Lake. And I kind of work all over Wisconsin. I'm very blessed. I enjoy what I do. And I have a lot of slides. And I tend to be a talker. So I'm going to try and move through everything so that we stay somewhat on schedule. So the things that I was asked to speak about today are, shoreline restoration from working with a contractor or from a contractor standpoint. So I'm going to talk about a variety of things. I'm going to talk about, how you design your own project, a little bit about native plants. I'm going to show a lot of pictures, just to kind of give you an idea as you start to think about your own project or a project for your lake. So where do you start? I just passed out a handout that talks about some tips for doing shoreline restoration, things to think about, things to get you towards a project. First of all, when you're thinking about doing a shoreline planting or maybe a rain garden or something like that, you want your project to be not only beautiful, to benefit your property, to enhance your property. You're paying a lot of taxes. You don't want to do anything to take away from that value, but you also want that project to be functional. So how can you design your project or plan your project to be functional? So if this sounds like something you're able to undertake, great. If you need a professional like me, that's what we do. We work with landowners on these issues. So questions you have to ask yourself: do you have shoreline erosion? Bill and Evonne would tell you they put their buffer in first, and then 2 to 3 years later they ended up redoing our armoring on their shore. Would have been best if that was done first, so they wouldn't have had to go over the top of the plants. But the natives are hardy. They didn't lose a single plant in their shoreline planting, even having a contractor with a skid loader going over the top of it. So it just goes to show these are tough plants. With your buffer, are you also going to be catching runoff? Are you not just, providing shoreline habitat and erosion control, but are you collecting some of the rainwater that's coming down? Do you have downspouts? Where the downspouts dump out into the lawn, is there gullies? I see that almost on every property. Do you have little rills, little gullies in your yard? Do you need to get rid of invasive species? That is a real common one. Reed canary grass, buckthorn. Getting your site prepped first is the most important thing to a successful project. If your invasives are not taken care of first and you do a planting over the top of it, it becomes a mess because you're still trying to get rid of the bad things. Do you store your pier, your boat lift in the area that you want to do a planting? That's something to consider and how to work around that. How do you want your buffer to look? Do you want it to be a soft, natural aesthetic like the top pictures? Do you want it to be very colorful like the middle picture? Do you want a mix of both? Do you want it to have a softness, but do you want it to provide color? Where do you start? Okay, this goes to that handout that I passed out. You need to pick out how big of an area. That is also going to help determine somewhat what species you use, not just the soil type and if you're sun or shade, but if you're talking about some areas that are going to be really narrow, you can't use big tall plants. They don't look right. You need to size the plants according to the area that you have available in addition to the site conditions. Remember, and I'm a contractor, I think I'm a little unusual because I'm not going to come out and say, you need to do the biggest area possible. You need to do the area that you guys know you can keep up, that you can maintain. My favorite projects are projects where the landowner does, 300 square feet in 1 year, 300 square feet another year. That is a fun way to do these projects. And now we get into more of the specifics of the site. Do you have dry soil? Do you have wet soil? Even though the water is right by the area you want to plant, if there's an elevation change, say you have riprap, and you have an elevation change, just because you're 2 feet from the water's edge, that soil might actually be relatively dry. So that's something to consider. Are you full sun, part sun? Are you full shade? Determine the species and colors that you want. You don't have to be a plant expert, and I'm going to mention that again later, but create a list of maybe your favorite plants that you know. You want things, as Bill and Evonne said, that flower throughout the season. So you want some things that are going to give you color in June, July, August, September. The same plant is not going to be able to cover the whole season, so you want different things giving you some color and interest. You also need to remember that there are other costs than plants, and I've run into that, especially years ago when Shoreline Restoration started to become popular. People get excited about the plants. I get excited about the plants, but there are a lot of other costs. Mulch, having an herbicide application done, hoses. You have to keep these things watered. I mean, the initial watering is critical. And then if you're hiring somebody, there's the labor cost, possibly a design cost. So I'm going to just show you really quickly a couple of sites that I did through Healthy Lakes. This one is on the Cloverleaf Lakes up in Shawano County. Landowner had landowner had kind of a grassy area. He mowed this whole area, but decided he didn't really need to be mowing that and wanted to create habitat. So we came in, the landowner planted right with me, mulched right with me. We mulched, we planted, and that's that same open area. Shoreline is stable. Look at that nice, heavily vegetated, deep-rooting shoreline. This is a mix of the species that went in, wetland species like you see right here, and shady species like you see right here. So there was a mix. There was wet edge and there was upland shade. rough costs of what Mr. Rosenfeld's project was. It was $75 to have me do the herbicide application. Mind you, this is a couple years ago now, so, costs do change. 6 yards of mulch, 350 native plants, labor, 2 bushes. He had existing trees, so we didn't need to add any trees to be in compliance with Healthy Lakes. And then, I do charge a little design and coordination fee going up to look at the site initially and that sort of thing. So he came out to just over $1,400. Healthy Lakes would get a landowner $1,000 maximum. To get that $1,000, you have to spend $1,333. So it covers 75% up to $1,000. So you get an idea. They got $1,000 towards their project. That beautiful project only cost them $417.48. So that speaks to a lot of landowners. This is a site on Fox Lake. So on Cloverleaf Lake, we did, I think, 10 Healthy Lakes shoreline plantings. On Fox Lake, I think we did another 9. Last year on Chute Pond in Oconto County, I think I did 9. This year, I guess I have 10 more. So Healthy Lakes has obviously been good for my business, and I'm very appreciative of that. But these are really fun projects, and it's exciting to see this interest all over the state. Fox Lake, very heavily agricultural county. They're dealing with major water quality issues. Again, this is a movement where the landowners, the shoreland landowners, are trying to show their commitment so the agricultural community will up their commitment to helping the lakes. So here we see a nice shoreline. It was vegetated. This is a part-time resident. There is her planting 1 full year. So this was last August. She did a second planting. So in October of 17, 2 months after this picture was taken, she did another part of her yard. So she had been signed up to do 2. You can do 2 projects, two shoreline plantings. Again, hers was very wet organic. So almost all shoreland plants, a little butterfly weed to get some earlier season color. Her run of costs right there. Her project did not even get her the full $1,000 because it didn't cost a full $1,333. Again, she helped, and she also had neighbors help. So there was a labor, she didn't have to pay full amount for labor. So I'm going to transition now into designing your project. Planning a design, you need to put something on paper. Show the main features. You want to show where your boathouse is, your structures, your decks. Fire pits need to, if you can, they need to be moved away from the lake. We don't want that all flowing through your fire pit into the lake. So, talking about where your fire pit is or where it's going to be moved to, trees, shrubs, that sort of thing. I am going to show you a prairie planting, and I show these slides because it really shows you the plant side of it. So this is a small prairie I did for some very nice people about 12 years or so ago. Designs, she wanted an organic shape. I didn't know what that meant, so I just started drawing some stuff up, different sizes that fit her budget, and then where the tall things were going to go, where the medium things were going to go, and the short things around the edge. This was another sketch I did. She didn't like that shape. So, just kind of working on options. This was the reason I love this project, besides the landowners were fabulous, and he has since passed, but fabulous people. They did 1,000 square feet for like 4 years in a row. It was so fun. We knew from year to year what plants she decided she didn't like, what plants she wanted to do more of. She loved it even more for stepping into it over time. And I think it was a great way to do it. So these pictures are when the 3rd year was done. This is our 3rd set of planting. This is the 2nd year. And the 1st year, the initial year, was further back. This is spring. So here we have a spring bloomer. This is penstemon. So again, you stage plants to have different color over the season. So that's in May. And again, this was the planting in 2005. This was the section done in 2006. And these are the babies that were just put in 2007. We, again, size tall things to the middle and short things on the edge so they're not flopping over the grass or flopping over pathways. So you can kind of see how it's stepped down in size to get to that nice edge like Patrick showed. You see that mulch there. It shows it's maintained. It's cared for. Here again, May, you see the penstemons blooming. Now this is the same planting in August. Now we've transitioned to things like purple coneflower and maybe some of the goldenrods. So interest over the season. This is a sketch from Lac La Belle, or a planting from Lac La Belle. And I want to kind of show you now both the the plantings, and the designs. So here's a design I did. It probably doesn't show up as well. You see the boundary. The edges of these plantings to me are very critical. You don't want additional work. So that means you need to make it so that you can run your mower super easy along it. Why make it really curvy when now you got to get the push mower out to get into those edges? Something very easy to mow along, something that you or your mowing company will handle easily. I happened to be expecting one of my boys at the time, so I had a friend come and we put a hose down for the edge, and then he sprayed the Roundup, and you can see the Roundups going down. The landowner actually planted right with me. She and her husband were out there planting, and it was a very lot of goose poo over a long period of time makes plants grow big. So the plants took off and did very well. But this is on Lac La Belle, which is actually, kind of a higher end place, and people, meticulously manage their yards, and they loved it. And since then, there's probably been another 8 projects that I personally have been involved with. So you get these on your lake, people see how great they are, and you see other ones pop up. This is another one on Lac La Belle. Again, gentle edge. This is my process is, we pick the shape, we put herbicide down, we mulch, and then we plant. I like to mulch through the planting, or through the mulch. That way I don't break the plants. So again, landowner was out there planting. They actually, on that one, they had people from their lake association. So everybody kind of gave a little time. Interesting landowner, she's an interior decorator. Her specific request was no pastels. She wanted vibrant colors. That is a unique thing to ask for. Now, I'm going to transition over again more towards design. I want you thinking about what you can do on your yard and how to get that on paper. There's a lot of different ways these can be drawn up. This is the design sheets we used to use when I was in Polk County years and years ago. So I want to show you there's no one way. So here's a property, you can see the basics. There's the shore, here's the stairs, here's the house, here's some trees. Look at this design that was done. Very gentle curving shape on top, lots of bushes added, different species of plants. This is a similar type property that would match that. Again, you see on that property, the trees are there, as Patrick said. They're restoring the ground cover layer, but they didn't have to take all the trees out because they were able to do some limbing. So again, you don't have to take those trees down. They're just limbed way up. All right, so getting back to the design aspect of it. Here you go. Here's a treed shoreline. Here's a design where here's the viewing access corridor, so boats, lifts and stuff stored in there, maybe the fire pits in that area, but everything else was going to be vegetated. Very boxy. Additional trees and shrubs were put on the lot lines, so they didn't impact their view. Okay, that's one way to do it. Here's another way. So here's a very rounded edge. The pathway, instead of coming maybe right here, is over on this side. Shrubbery is brought, because it's not going to impact their view, is brought more towards the shoreline area. Here's another possibility where the access is over here and it's not 30 feet wide. You generally get 30% of 100 feet of shoreline. It's a narrow access because they didn't use this area because it was sloping and so forth. So again, don't leave it to be mowed if you don't need it to be mowed. Let's get it covered and enjoy it as habitat and for beauty. And again, here's another one where they actually did the planting along the lot line, brought the planting very interesting shape. Curving path, I get a lot of requests for that. Instead of a straight line from the pier to the house, a little bit of a curve to it so that it has a little more interest, looks a little more natural. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to do them. Here's the design I did on Green Lake. They needed 2 accesses because they had more than one pier. Those things can be worked in. Instead of, initially they were thinking, well, let's just leave the whole area open between the 2 piers. Why? Do you need that? Let's see what we can do. You also want to put in other things like this property. We had a tree that needed to go down. The tree was going to die anyway, and they wanted to have some fish habitat. This is like 12 years ago. And they did. They put it on their sketch. The tree magically went exactly where they wanted it to go. And was great fish habitat, and also really broke the wave action that was pounding their shoreline. Those down trees also limit the ice impacts. It's never a guarantee. As a contractor, I can tell you that's never a guarantee, but they do seem that woody material seems to absorb heat. You don't see the ice be as impactful where you have that woody material. We talk a lot about plants. I love this part. I'm the lucky one who gets to talk about this. You don't have to be an expert. You just need to know a little bit. You need to know some things what you like and maybe some things that you don't like. You need to know what's good and what's bad. So people always ask me, why are you always talking about natives? You know, what does it matter if we just get some plants in there, some perennial plants? Well, as Patrick was saying, the native species are adapted to our local site conditions. They provide the necessary habitat, and cultivars and non-natives are invasive species. We have barberry, that I have growing by my house. We have that coming up on a little island in the Sunnyside Estuary on Green Lake. It's never been development out there, but now barberry is coming up because the birds are dropping the seeds. So even things that we think are okay are not okay. And you don't want to be planting, biennials and things like that. Popular plant in the Green Lake area. This is Jacob Klein Monarda. Monarda is a native that Jacob Klein wasn't. This is what the true native Monarda looks like. This is bee balm. Patrick mentioned that before too. It can be a little aggressive. It can like to go in places maybe you don't want it. But on tough sites, if you're dealing with sand or slope or that sort of thing, those aggressive species have a place because they can fight to root in. Be aware, these natives have lots of names. I've always known that plant as bee balm or bergamot. It's also known as Monarda. A lot of these, blazing star is also known as gay feather. You might be talking to your neighbor about the same plant, but you're using different names. So be aware of that. I love this slides from Prairie Nursery. Again, as Patrick said, talks about the rooting depths of native plants. The longest rooted one on there is cylindrical blazing star. That's this. So this is a first-year plant. This was just seeded probably, 2 months ago or so. That plant already has little baby roots coming out the bottom. These things are deep rooters. A lot of these plants are. So be aware of that. That's what we're going for. This is a sedge, this is tussock sedge, also started this spring, has the biggest root of everything I've got in here. These are the ones that we put on the shore to hold the soil. So there is a functionality to all this. Natives versus exotics, you guys probably know this. Things like Oriental bittersweet, that's becoming a problem in Green Lake. Buckthorn. You put these projects in, and over time, I'm sure people have said, you put in a native shoreline, you don't really have to do any work, you don't have to mow anymore. As has been said, you do need to do maintenance because buckthorn's going to want to come in. Reed canary grass is going to want to come in, possibly purple loosestrife. So you need to at least know what the bad things are. That will help you down the road. Or you need to hire somebody who can come in and make sure those don't get a foothold. Patrick kind of covered this about the different types. There's prairie type shoreland plantings. There is woodland, there is wetland, and there's emergent. I do a variety of emergent plantings. It's becoming popular. So when we talk about native plants, we're talking about things like butterfly weed and stiff goldenrod and beard tongue. Butterfly weed, that's my midsummer bloomer. The goldenrods are late season. Beard tongue, again, that's the penstemon. That's an early season. So a professional is going to help you know that. This is lavender hyssop. This is my very favorite plant. This is a mint. Deer and rabbits won't eat the mints. So a lot of times if I'm in a site that's got a lot of deer damage or predation, we'll use the mints heavily to try and help ward those off. Blazing star, they're just so beautiful. And then things like texture. Here you have not only do you have a contrast of white and pink flowers, you also have a contrast in texture. You have the pale purple coneflower, which is more vertical, and the flat-topped quinine, which is a different texture. So little things like that can bring even more interest to your planting. I always try and, Patrick will probably laugh when I say this, but I try to remind people about the different levels of canopy and shade and so forth. So you can't plant full sun things in shade areas. Bottlebrush grass is a shade. Canada anemone, columbine, which I have right here. Look at this. This is, and I just broke the top up. But that's the wonderful thing about these natives. That doesn't hurt that plant at all. It can take all the top growth off. It's just going to make new ones. You can't do that with an annual, but perennials you can do that with. So they're very, very hardy. So the rabbits come in, they eat the tops off. They'll come right back if you keep the rabbits away. So again, getting into shady species. Ferns, that adds a beautiful texture to a native planting. Wetland species, these to me are the most fun because they're the most vibrant. And I love working on that soft, wet shoreline. So there's milkweed, which I have right here. This is what the monarchs love. I have had them come in my greenhouse, take every leaf off of these. There's nothing but a stick. and a week later, they fully re-leaf back out. That's what these are designed to do. So I remind myself not to get excited. Bone set. So there's a variety of colors for these. Cardinal flowers, one of the only reds in the native Wisconsin palette, but it is beautiful. And if your conditions support that, you're lucky, because I know a lot of people who try to grow that on their shores, but it can be a little more picky. Great blue lobelia, that's probably what was on most of these shorelines before we ever got here and mucked them up. So, tussock sedge, this is tussock sedge right here. Again, deep rooting, very pretty. I like the sedges more than the grasses because at the end of the season, these kind of just drape like you see in that picture. They drape. They don't look maybe as weedy as a grass. Again, you don't have to be an expert, but you need to know a
Don't
bit.
you think landowners too can tell a sedge with that growth form a little easier than a grass?
Than a grass. That really does kind of look weedy. So getting back to talking about Patrick and the shade, the different levels of canopy, I deal with a lot of landowners who are like, oh, I don't want shrubs. So it's a hard thing as a contractor to try and meet the requirements of healthy lakes, but also keep the landowners happy. So I deal a lot with very short shrubs. Meadowsweet is one of those. This is winterberry holly. Love it. I use a lot of this, but you actually need to have a male and a female to get these to give off the great berries. So anyway, some of the native shrubs, which I strongly recommend, if not in a natural area in front, then please on your lot lines. Chokecherry, elderberry, gray dogwood. That's the winterberry holly. It produced the berries, so there are male and females in the area. Red osier dogwood, which is probably the best thing for holding your shore in place. And planning for the best look. So, and I think I have this on the handout. So develop a focal point, whether it's the tallest plant, the most vibrant plant, the biggest grouping of one species. And you want to do, as we've talked about, those drifts of color. Big groups will keep your planting looking tidy. Gentle curves so you can mow along it. Mixture of texture. Oh, one thing that I've learned in the last 5 years, you do not have to use giant trees. I have people who be like, well, I want the biggest trees I can get, bring in bald and burlap. They'll spend a lot of money for these big trees that come in. Bald and burlap were growing in the ground. They bring in a tree spade, they chop the roots off, and then you get this big tree that you pay a lot of money for, and then that tree doesn't grow for 2 to 3 years as it's putting out new feeder roots, versus getting a larger potted tree, which may be smaller to start with, is a fraction of the price, and will put on growth right away and catch up to the bald and burlap. So I hope I expressed that right. Just be aware, these don't have to cost $1 billion to look good. And then again, I'm a big fan of the informational signs because I think they show your commitment. They also show your, that you're doing this for the right reason. So there are projects that are designed very garden-like. There's space between them. There is big groupings. You get an idea, there's no weed growth. This is a planting from Polk County from back in the day. This was basically just a prairie. There aren't maybe the big groupings. It was done in a very natural way, and there are weeds, the mullins coming in. But the landowners like that, and the mullein is actually great bird habitat. So everybody has different expectations, and I always say be realistic. I like to show this because this is a problem and a success. This was a buffer that I did on Legend Lake in 2008. So large planting, actually curved around to the backside of this property as well. Huge planting, very sandy soil. The next spring, lots and lots of rain, like this spring, flooding. And flooding in these coconut logs, these vegetated logs, they don't get along. So we had some soil loss behind the logs. We had plants die in the logs because they didn't get above the flood water before the water was sustained at a higher level. So we had to come in and basically put in a bunch of new plants. Didn't really have to do anything to the log other than probably bring a little bit more mulch and touch it up. And that is that same exact spot a year later. So there was a little bit of a setback, and there is often on these projects. If you have deer, rabbits, even if it's not a right on the water thing. But be aware, you can have a setback, but you can still have phenomenal results. Had that biolog not been in there, they would have lost feet of shoreline to that initial flood. So it all kind of works together. I'm getting to the end, so what I'm going to show you now are just some quick recommendations from me. Turf removal. I'm not a fan of herbicides for a variety of reasons. And I found it does, in my opinion, work the best. So spray the area you want to plant, it dies off, you put the mulch over the top and you plant. Coming in with a sod cutter and taking that turf off, now you have bare soil right next to the lake. I don't think that's a great idea. So leaving the dead turf keeps moisture in, it holds the soil in place. Roundup works well, it needs to be done correctly. If you're going to hire somebody, make sure that they are a certified pesticide applicator. There's a lot of rigmarole to being a certified pesticide applicator, I can tell you that, but they know what they're doing. You maybe want to utilize a small trench around your planting. I'm not a big fan of edging. If it's some stones, I like it, that's fine. Plastic edging I despise, because everybody's got somewhat of a slope to the water. The runoff comes down, number one, it hits the plastic edging, it can't go into the buffer and be filtered, hits the plastic edging and it runs along the sides and then it pops the edging out of the ground within a couple years. I hate that. So utilizing just a small trench around that buffer and putting mulch in there is going to work way better than the time and so expensive using plastic edging. And we never want to till. Never want to till in the shoreline area. We do in a rain garden, but not in a shoreline buffer. Planting methods. These are great. So these are little augers that you put into a cordless drill and you go zoop, 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 and you can plant 100 plants in an hour. I mean, you can plant a lot. I actually have gas-powered augers. By myself, I can lay out and plant probably 150 to 180 plants in an hour. So these can be done very quickly. They really can. Potted plants versus plugs. These are considered plugs where I come from. Some people consider them potted, but this, in my mind, is a plug. You can also get those same plants in this size, so like a quart pot. Again, big cost difference. You will need fewer of these, you'll need more of those, but you have to put these farther apart to make it cost effective. And now you, in my opinion, you have more area for erosion to occur because you don't have that uniform root area. Limited fertilizer use. You really shouldn't need to use fertilizer when I'm doing a planting in a sandy, likely acidic soil area. I'll put a little malorganite and a touch of lime in the hole with the plants. They love that. We're not broadcasting, we're not letting the runoff take that into our lake. And watering is critical to the success of any planting. I always say every day for the first 3 weeks, and then maybe 1 to 2 times a week after that, depending on the weather, and you will have good luck. So that's pretty much it for me. I just want to again point out the different sizes you can get as far as budget-wise what you want to spend. It all depends on these kind of things. If you're using twice processed mulch versus maybe a single ground mulch, if you want a colored mulch versus regular, that changes the cost on all of these. But again, a landscaper will help you work through those issues. So, any questions?
I just had a comment when you were showing one of those early designs that you had. I would call it sort of a showcase thing, the larger property owner. Many of you might have heard of Our Wisconsin magazine, and they're noted for their color pictures of different things, and it's rural Wisconsin mostly, and they include like a county's most beautiful farm or whatever.
Sure.
I would think it would be a neat idea to promote this by getting a hold of one of their local county feature writers and pick a couple of your Showcase Lakes Initiative projects, because they're so beautiful and they would show off this particular program and some of your works. And that magazine has over 100,000 subscribers.
What is it again? Our Wisconsin?
Our Wisconsin, and Larry Nealer, who is an extension agent on the radio with Wisconsin Public Radio every day, he has the publisher and editor on his show once a month to talk about his current issue. And you could get quite a bit of promotional benefit from being in there.
Sure.
It's just a gorgeous magazine. Does anybody else get it or seen it?
Yeah.
We were in
Remember,
it.
they'll have the most beautiful farms and stuff, and people have really invested a lot of time in beautifying the outdoors, and I think
Sure.
something like this would fit perfectly in there.
Well, I know we were in, Natural Resources magazine?
Yeah.
Like a year or
Well,
two
this
ago,
would be
too.
another
Yeah,
way for you to
definitely. The more
explore.
people we can reach, the better. Is there any other questions?
Well, just about, I never heard about tilling rain gardens.
I with rain gardens, what I do is I mark out the area, spray, herbicide it so that the top growth is dead.
Oh,
And
tilling it to build.
Yeah, so we till it to shape it so that we don't necessarily need to bring in any other
I thought you were
material.
talking about maintenance and on.
No.
Sorry.
So I'm just going to bring us around to the end and say a few more things. Patrick covered some of the stuff I was going to say. That's great, because then I can just reiterate just a few things. And then we'll get you out of here to hopefully enjoy a day that maybe will be more beautiful than it has in the last couple days. So first of all, I'm Patricia Cicero. I'm the Water Resource Management Specialist for Jefferson County. If you live on a lake in Jefferson County, I can come to your lake and come to your property and give you ideas and next steps, both on all these Healthy Lakes projects and also shoreline erosion if it's more serious than what plants could address. So who's here because they love their lake? Everybody, right? Lakes provide us with many benefits in our life, and if you have a house on a lake, that you know that more than anybody. But there's also a lot of threats to our lakes, and the National Lakes Assessment that Patrick had talked about really pointed out that the major threats to our lakes are water quality design declines and habitat loss. And so if on our lake shores, if that habitat isn't there, if it's been taken out, then that will lead to poor, that habitat's not there anymore. It leads to poor water quality. So you're giving back to the lake by putting in these practices, because then it'll have impacts on the water quality. And because there have been these concerns to our lake shores and our lakes, that's why the DNR and UW Extension got together and put together these Healthy Lakes practices. One of the things that we need in order to implement these is a statewide implementation plan, which the state did put together. Jefferson County, the Land and Water Conservation Department did accept that plan. That means we're an entity that can apply for the grants that go along with these practices. I will say, though, that depending on what's going on your property or your shoreline, sometimes these practices aren't enough. You might need something with more engineering to it. And that's where I can come in. That's where I bring in Department of Agriculture engineers to help you. And so we do have resources available to you to address those harder problems. So that, just keep that in mind. And when Patrick mentioned that his name is on the back of this Healthy Lakes brochure, you all got one of those in your handout. And if you flip it to the back, you can also see that I put my name and number and contact information on there too. So that's how you can get there. All right. So Patrick talked a little bit about fish sticks. We did install 2 on Rock Lake. This winter, it was a big success, a big undertaking by the Rock Lake Improvement Association, Jefferson County, and the City of Lake Mills. We had ash trees from the City of Lake Mills. They were going to be cutting them down anyway, so they cut them down and we hauled them to the lake and got them installed. I understand that this maybe won't be something that every lakeshore property owner could do because of how much space you have. But definitely, if you have trees or limbs or brush from trees that are dipping into the lake, leave those. Or if it falls in there, leave them if it doesn't pose a navigation issue. Janet, did you have a question?
How would you know it would be a navigation issue? I mean, does any landowner have to write to put a tree in the lake?
So, you know, if you have 60 feet of frontage and, you know, a tree falls down between your property and the neighbor's property and you both have your piers really close to it and you're not going to be able to get your boat in and out, that's going to be a navigation issue.
I guess I'm thinking about the people on the lake.
Oh, you know, the areas within, I always forget, 100 or 150 feet from shore, you have to go slow, no wake. I did a woods survey on Rock Lake a couple years ago, and I counted 55 pieces of wood, I think it was. And so that wood's already in there. It's already in the lake. People aren't having issues with it now. The fish sticks that we put in, there will be some sticking out of the water. You know, there's going to be some tree trunks sticking out of the water. That's great habitat for turtles. They love to get up on that and sun themselves. So you can see it, but also if you're navigating, you're supposed to be going slow, no wake in those areas anyway.
Right, you put them in the no-wake areas, you don't put them out where people could hit them when they're going fast.
Right. They aren't in any areas where you'd be doing fast boating, or you shouldn't be doing fast boating. And you can see all that habitat underwater that this will provide. We've talked a lot about these native plantings. I've used some of the same slides. We talked about diversions, so that if you have water running down areas that you need to not direct it away from the water, that's a practice. Again, rock infiltration. We've used the same slides, but they're really good ones.
Have you done any of those yet?
We have not done any rock infiltration practices, but if you have issues with water coming off your house or your driveway, definitely get in touch with me and we can look at that. There's also rain gardens. We have a few rain gardens. If you came on our garden tour last year, we had a few rain gardens that people could tour. There's one at the, it's the elementary school. There's a rain garden there. So if you even want to just go and take a look to see what one looks like, that one you can easily get to. Yes.
Can you make a comment about those rock infiltration areas?
Yes.
I put a few of those up at some lakes up north and lead them into like sculpture gardens.
Oh, yeah.
And so people really, at first they were, but now I'll say the space is nice and open, and then they were all over it.
Right. It's a little bit of a cue to care for rock that you would put some interesting sculpture there.
A lot of folks are bleeding, using the rock infiltration to first grab the water, but if that's not enough, then they bleed it into a rain garden, and just like you say, have that aesthetic quality to it.
Yeah. So,
Between, like the buildings.
Yep.
The grass doesn't go very well anyway, and then they have some focal points. Even put some lights there, it's kind of look show.
so you've heard that these grants are available to lakeshore property owners. Some lake associations like Beaver Dam have decided that they were going to be the entity that does the lakes. Tim, before you leave, I just wanted to point out Tim Sprecher. I realized that I forgot this morning to put a list of contractors in our local area that are available to help you. Tim is somebody that does design work. So if you are interested in doing all your planting and everything like that, Tim can do designs for you. And when you signed in, if you gave us your email address, then we can send you that contractor list, and he's one of the contractors you can talk to. Thanks.
And then also, here in this binder, right by the booth, if you've got your phone, you can take a picture, snapshot, it's highlighted, all the local contractors, both for riprap and, you know, Lisa's information, Tim's information, so.
All right, so you've heard that you can get these grants. The county has decided to be concentrating on healthy lakes this year and probably future years. So you can talk to me and I can get you signed up for a grant. I can come out and take a look at your property, figure out what might be good practices for you, and then get you going and point you into the resources that you need. but also put you into that grant application that the deadline is in February 1st in order to get you some money to do these great practices. There is a contract that you need to sign that you're saying that you're going to be maintaining it. And a lot of these practices, they've made them such that, you know, especially the plantings, there's that handout that has the, all the different, I'm not thinking of the right word, all the different standard designs that they put together. If you're somebody that wants to go and look at that, there's a few of those extras by the display. It's a native plant guide, planting guide. You can go and you can see what all the plants are. It can be fairly overwhelming how many plants are out there to use. That's why also the Rock Lake Improvement Association decided to put this handout together, which shows some common native grasses, flowers, shrubs that you can use. So that's in your handout, just a few to give you a first start. Also, I need to do my county work to let you know that some of the things that you're going to do and might do within 35 feet of the water is regulated. So you should make sure that you're getting the proper permits. That could be county permits, it could be local city permits, it also could be DNR state permits. And so just a rule of thumb, if you're putting in some structure, stairs, paths, retaining walls are structures. Those would require permits. If you're doing any land disturbing activities, like if you have that rain garden within 35 feet and you're going to be tilling up that land, depending on the size of the rain garden, you might need a permit for that. Also, if you have to remove a huge, big patch of invasive species or smaller patches of invasive species, it also might be that you need to get a permit for that. I know that the invasives are bad, we need to get rid of them, but what happens if you take them up and all of a sudden there's just bare dirt everywhere? That's what the county's concerned about. So sometimes you're just required to plant something else. So if you're getting out those invasives, you're probably going to be planting something else anyway. So it's just a permit to make sure that we're not having bare soil out there that are impacting our lakes. Also, depending on what you're doing, you might need a state DNR permit. Definitely if you're putting in rock riprap, things like that, that requires a DNR permit. Sometimes land disturbances, depending on the size, you would need a permit from them. And some piers actually need permits too, because of the size or the number of boat slips you might be wanting. We have a lot of resources that we've given you in your handouts. There's also a ton more that Patrick brought and others that we brought over by the display. The Healthy Lakes website is a great place to go to get that. A lot of the people here today who have these fancy name tags on with the dragonfly on it. Dragonflies are one of those things that start growing in the water and then they transform and go use that great lakeshore edge. So some of the people that have these name tags on can also answer a bunch of your questions or point you in the right direction. So if you have questions after this, please come see us. I'm going to be sending out that contractor list to everybody who provided an email because I forgot it. Sorry about that. And then I think Susan's going to talk a little bit about the Shoreland neighbors in a moment. And really, I mean, all these projects are happening across the state because people like you love the lake that you're on and want to give back and have something beautiful in your own property. And so thanks to everybody who's come today. And I'll have Susan, oh, she's talking to somebody, but I'll have her talk about the Shoreland neighbors a little bit. I'll just give it a little up. Oh, are you ready?
Yeah, no, since we're running so incredibly late, And, oh, I appreciate you guys hanging out for this. Mary O'Connor over at Ascalon Fields, there was some kind of conversation about where can I get some natives. She is willing to give us coupons for 15% off, which is just a little something nice. If you're interested, see me, stop by, and I'll give you a coupon for some plantings good between now and early June, which is about the times that you'd be wanting to put in some perennials anyways. And then also, I will send up follow-up information to you if you've left your email to give you an idea of when this would be on TV so that, you know, friends who had to go to a wedding, graduations, those sorts of things could catch up on it if you wanted to re-see something. And then we'll also send you out some more information on a new program that we're starting called Shoreland Neighbors. Patrick and Patricia talked about, this is us just talking to each other. And so I've had some experiences that were kind of failures in gardening, and I'd be glad to share them with you, and I've had some great successes too. And I know Seal and Stan in the back, they've had the same thing, and Mike and Sue inherited a gigantic garden. So we would love to talk to you, and sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody who isn't professional. So, and then we can also help point out other resources. But I'll send out an email on that as well, kind of giving you names and contacts if you leave your information with us. One of the very, very hardest things for us to do is to find you. It's really hard. So if you want to, you go, I run past your house, you know me. But if you would leave your email, I promise not to abuse it, and we certainly don't sell it or do anything bizarre with it. We would only contact you dealing with the Shoreland stuff. I can put you under a separate database if that's what you'd like. So thank you so much. Anybody wants coupons, be sure to see me. I'll be standing right over there. Any other questions? Patrick's here. He could answer some questions. Oh, yes, in your packet, I think Sue had talked to you about this idea of a Shoreland pledge, and just giving you some ideas, since we do have an intimate relationship with the lake, since what we do is in the lake. Take a peek at that. If you want us to help you with anything, just go ahead. We've got scissors on the side tables. Cut it off and leave us information, and we'll get back in touch with you. But I think this is a kind of a beautiful sort of thing to think about. It can be so simple as just pick up your leaves and don't put them in the lake. Don't, let your dog's poop go into the lake. Don't mow right by the lake. To something beautiful as that. You can take your time, step by step. So thank you guys so much.